2 hours of ethical loopholes that gently unravel reality, to fall asleep, to have you ever done the right thing and still felt wrong? What if ethics isn't made of rules, but of ripples, not a straight path, but a spiral of good intentions, contradictions, and quiet regrets? Tonight, we invite you into a space where morality softens, where logic bends gently, and where even truth begins to exhale. Philosophers called it the gray between duty and doubt. Physicists call it uncertainty. But you might just call it familiar. In this dreamlike descent, we'll drift through ethical paradoxes, cognitive illusions, and forgotten corners of conscience, where nothing breaks loudly, but everything begins to quietly come undone. So close your eyes, let go of judgment, and allow the questions to do what answers never could, guide you gently into rest. The gentle collapse of right and wrong. You were taught early, right was right, and wrong was wrong, like colors that never bleed into each other, like traffic lights or neatly labeled boxes. Red means stop, green means go. But what if morality is more like twilight than noon? A place where light and shadow hold hands, and nothing stands alone in the clarity we were promised. Maybe it began the first time you held open a door for someone who walked by without a word, or the moment you were punished not for hurting someone, but for breaking a rule no one ever explained. Why did I get in trouble? A soft voice might have asked, and the only answer was a shrug. That's just the way it is. The world, it seemed, ran on rules, until one day it didn't. You remember it now, the moment you were asked the trolley question. A thought experiment dressed as a game. 1 person or 5. Flip the switch, or let it be. And suddenly the categories dissolved. No answer felt clean. Every option left fingerprints on your conscience. That's when something in you began to soften, like glass under slow heat. Do you think there's always a right choice? Someone whispers across a quiet kitchen table. Another stirs their tea. I used to, but now, I think, sometimes the kindest thing is not knowing. You see it in everyday life. The coworker who lies to protect a friend, the parent who steals medicine they can't afford, the child who doesn't tell the whole truth, not out of malice, but fear. Right and wrong blur, not because people are lost, but because they're human, tender, afraid, trying. And what if that's the most honest ethic of all? Not certainty, but sincerity. Not choosing the correct action, but being willing to sit with someone else's hurt without trying to fix it, without needing to be right. In a world addicted to answers, maybe the bravest act is to hold the question gently in your lap, to look at the mess and not flinch. You're not failing because you don't know what's right. You're just stepping into a wider truth. That morality isn't a destination, but a dance. And sometimes the rhythm slips, the floor gives a little, and all you can do is keep moving with grace. Now, as your breath grows slower, feel the weight of judgment loosening its grip. You don't have to solve anything tonight. Not every knot was meant to be untangled. Because sometimes the most ethical act is simply to stay, with the doubt, with the ache, with the silence that follows every complicated choice. And now we drift deeper, toward a quiet dilemma where saying nothing at all might echo louder than any word ever could. The violence of neutrality. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It scratches gently at the edges of the soul. It isn't the silence of serenity, but of absence. Absence of courage, absence of response. It poses as calm, wears the face of restraint. But beneath it, something trembles, something like guilt dressed in stillness. Neutrality, we often believe, is virtue, a fair observer, a refusal to provoke, a way to remain untouched by the chaos around us. But in the theater of human suffering, neutrality is never truly passive. It watches, and in watching, it waits too long. The moment you do not speak when cruelty walks by, the moment you avert your gaze to preserve inner quiet, something is preserved, yes, but it is not peace. It is the system that made you quiet to begin with. Two friends once sat on a park bench. The first one, eyes down, mumbled, "I don't want to take sides. It's just too messy." The second one asked, "If you saw someone pushing a child into the river, would you stand back and say, 'Let's hear both sides'?" They both laughed, softly, but uneasily, because beneath that laughter was the echo of 1,000 moments where people had done just that. Sometimes, choosing not to act is the most active thing you can do, a moral posture that folds into power's hand. Injustice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes easier when no one dares to disturb the air. The world has learned to hide its violence beneath procedures, behind the polished mask of staying neutral. It trains us to believe that fairness is equidistance from all sides, even when one side is suffering. And when we hold back in the name of balance, when we refrain from outrage to avoid discomfort, we become caretakers of a cruelty we claim to disown. It's easy to say, "It's not my problem," but whose problem must it be before it becomes yours? Let that question linger. Let it hum in the background like a low note of conscience. There are moments when stepping forward is not heroism. It's simply humanity. And moments when remaining still is not peace. It's the quiet pact we make with fear. As your breath slows, let that silence settle into you, not as blame, but as invitation. Invitation to listen deeper, not only to what's being said, but to what's being ignored. Because sometimes, neutrality is not the absence of harm. It is the space in which harm thrives unnoticed. Now we drift toward something gentler, but no less complex. If choosing sides can cause suffering, could the most moral act, paradoxically, be surrender? Let's breathe through that contradiction, together. The ethics of letting go. There's a quiet ache in the spaces where we hold too tightly, not just to people or memories, but to the belief that our care must always come wrapped in effort. We are taught that to love is to rescue, to repair, to remain. But some truths arrive like wind slipping through an open window, uninvited yet unmistakable. Maybe love isn't a grip, but an opening. Are you okay letting them go? A pause, a sip of tea. I don't know. I'm afraid they'll think I stopped caring. Maybe they'll finally feel how deeply you trusted them. In so many moments, we believe presence must look like persistence. We lean in. We stay past the moment of silence. We whisper advice into a wound still learning how to bleed. But across philosophies, especially in the gentle currents of Buddhism and the clear-eyed calm of Stoicism, there's another invitation. Letting go is not turning your back. It's turning toward reality without insisting it becomes your version of it. Yet the mind resists. Doesn't letting go sound like apathy? A kind of giving up? A way to exit the moral responsibility of care? Not exactly. There is an invisible thread between timing and tenderness. Let go too early, and it feels like abandonment. Too late, and it morphs into control disguised as help. It's a dance between respecting someone's growth and not confusing their struggle with your obligation to fix it. A friend once said, "She's drowning. I know I should swim out there, but I also know she's learning how to float. And in that tension lives a strange grace, because to let go, really let go, means trusting that someone else's path might not require your shadow beside them. It's not coldness. It's the softest kind of bravery. Ethically, it asks something uncomfortable. To care enough, to not interfere, even when every cell in you wants to act, even when silence hurts more than speech. But what if letting go is the action? What if releasing someone is how they learn to return, on their own terms, in their own time? There's a paradox here. The deeper the love, the looser the hold. The tighter the grip, the more fragile the bond. Like trying to hold water by squeezing your fist. Sometimes care wears the shape of a quiet goodbye, not because you want distance, but because love, in its highest form, does not demand proximity. Did you tell him you weren't coming back? I didn't need to. The silence said everything kinder than words could. Letting go is brutal in its clarity, gentle in its aftermath, and when done rightly, it leaves both sides lighter, untethered, but not unloved. So tonight, as the breath moves softly in your chest, feel its rhythm. Inhale with the warmth of presence. Exhale with the wisdom of release. This moment doesn't need you to fix it. It only needs you to be here, and then to let it pass, like all things do. And in the next quiet space, we'll unravel a puzzle even kindness can't fully solve. The paradox of altruism. There's a quiet sweetness to helping others, a gentle warmth that rises in the chest when you hold open a door, offer a meal, or say the right thing at the right time. It feels pure, doesn't it? Like a thread of light that runs straight from your heart to the world. But in the soft stillness of self-reflection, something curious begins to stir. What if that warmth is not selfless at all? Modern psychology has a phrase for this sensation: the helper's high. It's a documented emotional reward, your brain's little burst of serotonin and dopamine that follows an act of kindness. The science is clear. Even the noblest deeds often come with internal benefits: social approval, a stronger sense of identity, a calmer conscience. And none of these are bad things, but they blur the line between giving and gaining, between love and longing. One evening, two friends walked home after volunteering at a shelter. "Feels good to do something real, doesn't it?" one said. "Yeah," the other replied, slower. "But sometimes I wonder, am I doing it for them? Or to feel better about myself?" A pause. "Maybe it's both." And they walked the rest of the way in silence, not out of guilt, but in quiet acknowledgement of the strange, beautiful tangle that is the human heart. So here lies the paradox. If we only help others to feel good, is it still kindness? Or is it self-interest in disguise? Must love be entirely selfless to be real? Philosopher David Hume once wrote that even our most generous actions are rooted in a kind of personal pleasure, that we are moved by sympathy because it makes us feel more whole. But instead of condemning this, Hume saw it as a natural extension of being human. Empathy is not the erasure of the self. It is the self reaching outward, recognizing itself in another's eyes. The desire to do good may always loop back, however subtly, to the self. But that does not diminish its value. It simply reframes it. In fact, maybe purity is the wrong goal. Maybe it's not about erasing all ego, but about being transparent with it. Kindness, after all, isn't less real because it also makes you feel alive. Goodness isn't weakened by the presence of reward. It's made more resilient by the acknowledgement of its complexity. In this light, altruism becomes a dance, not of sacrifice or martyrdom, but of mutual resonance, a rhythm where giving and receiving flow together, not as opposites, but as inseparable motions of the same gesture. Let your thoughts soften around this idea, that perhaps the most sincere love is the one that knows its own shadow, that we can be both generous and human, both kind and comforted by our kindness. The heart, it seems, does not need to be perfect to be good. Pause now. Let that ripple settle in your chest. Not to quiet the paradox, but to rest gently inside it. Because next, we'll ask something even deeper. What does it mean to choose, if the universe was always going to unfold exactly this way? Consent in a deterministic universe, a quiet moment. Two people cross paths at a bookstore, reaching for the same title, The Illusion of Choice. One of them smiles and says, "After you." The words feel small, polite, but behind them lives a centuries-old debate. Did he choose to say that? Or was it simply the next domino falling in a line of causes that began long before either of them walked in? We grow up believing consent is sacred. That choice is the axis on which morality turns. That to say yes or no is the deepest expression of our freedom. But what if the self that speaks was never free at all? Determinism whispers a strange possibility, that our choices aren't really choices, that they're the inevitable result of neural firings, childhood moments we don't remember, chemical balances we never controlled, that your yes was rehearsed in the silence of your DNA, that your no was a shadow of 1,000 unchosen moments. A friend once said during a quiet walk, "I still feel guilty for what I agreed to back then. But when I think about who I was, I'm not sure I had any other path." His voice wasn't bitter, just curious, as if tracing a fossil he hadn't known he was made of. If free will is a myth, then consent becomes performance, a ritual spoken not out of agency, but momentum. That doesn't mean it's meaningless, but it changes the lens. Instead of blame, maybe what's needed is reverence for the forces that shaped the yes, gentleness for the ones who say nothing, forgiveness for those who never had the wiring to say no. You may start to see it in ordinary life. A nod at the end of a conversation that wasn't really a choice, a reluctant laugh at a joke that didn't feel right, a signature made out of pressure, not power. These moments often pass unnoticed, but when you do notice, they shimmer with paradox. Is morality still possible in a world without true volition? Or does it shift from policing choices to holding space for complexity, from justice as punishment to ethics as understanding? A young woman at a bus stop once said, "I thought I was making the decision, but it felt more like I was being made by it." Her friend nodded slowly, then said, "Yeah," like the words were already in my mouth before I spoke. And maybe that's all we are, voices echoing down long corridors of cause and consequence. Still responsible, perhaps, but not as authors, more like caretakers of a story that's writing itself through us. Let that ripple through your chest for a while, not to trouble you, only to soften you. And now, we turn to the next paradox. What if trying to save one life quietly costs the lives of many others? When saving one means failing many. You know those moments in old stories, when the hero rushes in, defies the odds, and rescues the one they love? We're told that's what goodness looks like, a single act of courage wrapped in certainty. But life isn't written like a fairy tale. It doesn't pause for dramatic music or offer clear heroes. Sometimes morality hands you a knife and says, "Someone gets cut. Choose who." In the quiet hours of the night, ethics turns cold. not cruel, just unflinchingly honest. It begins to whisper that saving everyone is not always possible, that love alone doesn't bend physics or probability, and so we meet the cruel logic of utilitarian ethics when numbers matter more than names. A lifeboat, a storm. It can carry 5, but there are 6 people reaching for your hand, and you know all of them. Your brother, your child, your closest friend, your mother, your partner, a stranger who once saved your life, one more than the boat can bear, one more than fate will forgive. You freeze, not because you're weak, but because there is no right answer. You can try to save all 6 and sink them all. You can make a decision that will haunt you longer than the storm itself. And in that moment, morality doesn't feel like a compass. It feels like a curse. A soft voice, barely above the rain, asks, "What would you do?" Another replies, "There's no answer I'd be proud of." That's the heart of this paradox. Ethical action doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it's muddy, shaking, and covered in tears. Sometimes doing the most good demands a kind of heartbreak that logic alone cannot carry. You weigh lives, knowing one will be left out, not because they mattered less, but because math doesn't cry, and boats don't bend to mercy. And what happens after the decision is made? Do we find peace in the numbers? Or are we forever marked by the face we couldn't save? Even those who survive carry a quiet guilt, like invisible salt water on their skin. The choice made sense, but it never feels right. And maybe that's what makes us human, the ache that remains even after reason has spoken. There's no comfort here, no resolution. Just a space to sit with the unsolvable, to feel the sharp edge between love and logic, where every action has a shadow. Maybe we don't need answers tonight. Maybe we only need the courage to breathe in this unbearable weight and not look away. Close your eyes. Let the ocean of thought settle around you. Let the echo of that impossible choice slowly dissolve. Ahead lies a gentler sorrow, the harm we cause, simply by doing nothing. The invisible harm of inaction. The room is quiet, too quiet. Not peaceful, just paused, as if someone pressed mute on the moment when something should have been said, but wasn't. The soft kind of silence that feels like complicity wearing perfume. A woman waits beside a subway turnstile. Her card doesn't scan. People glance. No one stops. The train arrives, the doors close, and the world moves on, as it always does. But in the space between glances and action, something subtle happened. A choice was made, not by what anyone did, but by what they didn't. We often think of harm as an act, a shove, a cruel word, a lie, but some of the deepest harm arrives like still water, no ripples, no motion, just the absence of a hand that could have reached out and didn't. Inaction, like a shadow, never claims credit, but always leaves a mark. One voice breaks the silence over dinner. "Do you think staying out of it makes you neutral?" The other responds without lifting their fork. "I think staying out of it keeps me sane." Even if it keeps someone else suffering? A pause, then the sound of a plate being scraped clean. Ethical theories like consequentialism suggest that failing to intervene when we could have changed an outcome isn't morally neutral. It's part of the causal chain. Virtue ethics adds another layer. It's not just about what happens, but about the kind of person we're becoming by letting it happen. There's a quiet erosion that occurs when we look away often enough. We don't just ignore suffering. We begin to forget how to see it. You may not throw the stone, but if you watch it being thrown and say nothing, if you soothe your conscience by calling it not your problem, then part of the impact belongs to you too. And yet, no judgment here. This isn't a call to carry the weight of every injustice. It's a call to notice the threshold, the moment where our silence stops being rest and becomes retreat, where inaction is no longer peaceful, but complicit. Sometimes we don't speak because we feel too small. Sometimes it's because we think our voice wouldn't matter. But moral weight doesn't measure in decibels. It measures in presence. A boy once held open the door for an elderly woman struggling with her bags. He didn't say a word, just nodded, then walked on. She didn't say thank you, just caught her breath and kept going. No grand gesture, but something shifted. A kindness, not in what was done, but in what wasn't left undone. This is not a guilt trip. It's a soft question, folded gently into the night. What is our silence protecting? And what is it letting through? Now let that question rest in your chest like a low hum. You don't need to answer it now. Maybe not ever. Just feel its presence. The kind of question that doesn't need solving, only holding. As we drift deeper, the next doorway opens. A paradox of the heart. When caring too much begins to break us, let the silence lead you there. The prisoner's dilemma of empathy. You sit across from someone you care about, maybe a stranger, maybe a friend. You feel the warmth rising in your chest, a flicker of tenderness, the urge to reach out, say something kind, do something human, but something stops you. A pause, a quiet doubt, and across from you, they feel it too. That same warmth, that same hesitation. So neither of you moves. The silence isn't hostile. It's not cold. It's just cautious, like two hands hovering near each other in the dark, unsure who should reach first. This is the emotional version of the prisoner's dilemma, a classic game theory puzzle where two people, acting in self-protection, both lose more than if they had trusted each other. In logic, it's a problem of cooperation, but in ethics, it becomes a question of empathy, of fear dressed as patience. Because in this inner game, the stakes are vulnerability. If I show care first, will it be reciprocated? Or will I look weak, naive, exposed? So I stay quiet, you stay guarded, and what could have been connection quietly decays into calculation. Two good hearts, each waiting for a signal that it's safe to feel. And in that mutual waiting, the moment passes. You might overhear a conversation like this in a coffee shop. I wanted to check on her. She looked like she was about to cry. So why didn't you? I thought, maybe she didn't want anyone to notice, but maybe she was waiting for exactly that. Empathy becomes a gamble. Do I make the first move? Or do I protect myself and wait? We start to treat kindness like strategy, calculating outcomes, avoiding emotional debt. Not because we don't care, but because we care so much that the possibility of rejection stings before it even happens. And this is where the paradox deepens. When no one wants to be the first to feel, everyone suffers. Empathy doesn't vanish, it just freezes. And frozen warmth is colder than absence. Perhaps it's not just the fear of being hurt, but the deeper fear of being alone in our kindness, to be the one who reaches and is met with silence, to say, I understand, and hear nothing back. So we swallow the urge, let the moment pass, and later, tell ourselves we did the right thing by staying neutral. But what if that silence was the very thing that hurt the most? Let this question melt gently in your chest. What would happen if just one person went first? If one hand moved in the dark, not because it knew the other would meet it, but because it hoped? Breathe slowly now, not to solve the riddle, but to feel its weight. Let the air move through the space where kindness once hesitated. Because next, we explore a different burden, the kind that clings even when you had no real choice at all. Guilt, the echo of empathy when action wasn't possible. Guilt without choice. There's a strange kind of ache that lives in silence. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that hums beneath the surface of being born into a story you didn't write. You feel it in the pause after someone says, "Some people have it worse," or in the hollow stillness that follows a news report about lives you'll never know, but that somehow feel tethered to yours. Why do I feel heavy when I haven't done anything wrong? A voice like that often arises not from wrongdoing, but from existing in a system tilted by time. You didn't build the slope, but you're standing on it. The guilt that grows in these spaces has no direct cause. It isn't tied to a single event or a sharp choice. It lingers diffuse, like a mist of responsibility that clings without a source. Survivor's guilt, privilege guilt, inheriting a history stitched with loss, stitched with advantage. These aren't mistakes. They're positions, given, not chosen. And yet, the conscience stirs as if you placed yourself there. Earlier today, someone asked gently, "Do you ever feel guilty, just for being okay?" And the other replied, "More often than I'd like to admit, especially when I realize someone else didn't get that option." A quiet nod followed. No judgment, just two people swimming through the same invisible current. Ethics becomes softer here, not a sharp sword, but a fog, because responsibility in this space isn't about what you did. It's about what you notice, what you inherit, what you do with the awareness of standing in a room lit brighter than most. But guilt, when left untended, can harden. It can shrink you, make you afraid to move, to speak, to live. And in trying not to harm, you risk withdrawing so far that you help no one at all. That's the twist. Unchosen guilt can still shape your actions, but not always in ways that serve. So maybe the question shifts from, "Do I deserve this?" to, "How can I hold this?" Not as a burden, but as a soft signal, a compass. Not to erase the guilt, but to transmute it into staying open, into listening to stories not your own, into letting go of shame and welcoming presence. There is nothing to atone for tonight. You can lay that weight down beside you, like placing a stone at the edge of a river, not to forget it, but to let it rest while the water moves on. If your eyes are heavy now, that's okay. You don't need to solve the world before sleep. Guilt without choice can't be undone in a single breath, but it can be softened. And sometimes, that is enough. Coming next, a stranger's kindness that hides a quieter harm. The kindness that enables cruelty. You meant well. That's the haunting part. Your voice was soft, your actions generous. You wanted to help, so you did. And yet, beneath that gentle offering, something quietly unraveled. Not just in them, in you. There's a hidden weight in kindness when it becomes a shield from necessary pain. When we cushion someone too early, when we prevent them from falling, we may also prevent them from standing. The pain they needed to face, the truth they had to meet, gets pushed into tomorrow. Again and again, until one day there's nothing left but dependency disguised as love. A quiet cafe. Two friends sit across from one another. One has fallen again, into the same habit, the same mistake. The other, compassionate and tired, asks, "Do you want me to fix this for you?" A pause, then a reply, low and hesitant. I don't know. I think I just don't want to feel alone while I fix it myself. Sometimes, What we're truly asked for isn't rescue, but presence. Ethics sharpens here like a blade so thin you almost miss the cut. Is kindness still kind if it enables suffering? If it reinforces helplessness? When we step in too quickly, offer too much, soften every consequence, we may end up doing harm in a velvet glove. We say, I care, but what we do is control. We say, let me help, but what we mean is, let me make this easier for me to watch. This is not to argue against compassion, only to say that compassion, too, must grow up. It must learn to walk beside, not ahead. It must sometimes let go, even when it trembles, especially when it trembles. There are times when real care looks like silence, like a boundary, like a withheld solution. Not because we don't want to help, but because we trust the other person's strength more than their pain. A teacher once said, "If I carry the child every time he falls, he will never know he can walk." That same logic applies to hearts, to lives, to those we love and ache to protect. Some wounds must be earned. Some victories must be solitary. And still, we grieve. There's a sorrow in standing back, in choosing not to step in watching someone we care about stumble forward into fire. But if we always prevent the fall, we may rob them of the chance to rise. So ask yourself gently, is my kindness allowing them to grow, or only preventing me from feeling guilty? Let that question dissolve across your thoughts like twilight. Some truths arrive not in words, but in weather, the slow cooling of certainty, the dimming of the day. And as the light fades, we drift toward another moral paradox, one shaped by memory, pain, and impossible grace. The quiet crisis of forgiveness. The double bind of forgiveness. Sometimes forgiveness is spoken of like it's medicine, like it will stitch the wounds, hush the nightmares, and return the world to balance. But what happens when the wound is still open, and someone hands you a bottle labeled, "Move on"? A late evening conversation once began with a quiet voice. "I know I should forgive them. Everyone keeps saying I'll feel better if I do." And across the table, after a pause, came the reply, "But what if forgiveness feels like lying about what happened?" That's the tension, the double bind. You're told healing requires release, but that release can feel like betrayal. Betrayal of your memory, of your pain, of the truth that still pulses beneath your skin. Forgiveness, in its purest form, is voluntary. A gift, a letting go that comes not because it's expected, but because the soul is ready. Yet too often, forgiveness is demanded like a toll for peace. Families, therapists, even strangers on the internet lean in with tilted heads and ask, "Have you forgiven them yet?" As if closure is a checklist, as if morality has a deadline. But for many, especially those walking the long path of trauma, forgiveness can feel like a silencing, a premature closing of the story. And when society romanticizes those who forgive their abusers, it can quietly punish those who choose not to. One woman shared softly, "Every time I hear people praise him for getting his life together, I feel like I vanish a little, like what he did to me stops existing." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. Forgiveness hadn't healed her. It had erased her. So here's a quiet truth, tucked gently beneath the louder ones. Withholding forgiveness can be an act of integrity. It can be the boundary that says, "What happened matters." It can be the silence that honors what was taken without pretending it was okay. And perhaps, in some cases, it's not the forgiveness that frees us, but the refusal to perform it for others' comfort. Let that thought be soft, not heavy. You're not being asked to forgive, nor to withhold, only to rest in the truth of your own timing. Like when someone reaches for your hand too soon after it's been burned. You don't need to pull away in anger. Just gently keep your distance. Let the skin remember what safety feels like before it opens again. If you're still here, still listening, it's okay to drift. The mind doesn't need a conclusion, just a place to rest. Next, we ask something even more delicate. Who truly deserves a second chance, and who decides? Let your breath carry you there, slowly, quietly, as if walking barefoot through the questions. Who deserves a second chance? He asked her quietly. Do you think people can really change? She took a long breath before answering. I think some do, but I also think some just get better at hiding. There's something undeniably powerful about redemption, a fall from grace, followed by remorse, transformation, return. It's the arc that stories love to tell, the villain who becomes the teacher, the addict who finds peace, the criminal who builds homes instead of breaking them. These tales stir something deep within us, a hope that mistakes are not the final word, that no one is forever lost. But the ethics behind these stories is not so easily settled. What happens when the person seeking forgiveness once terrified us, when their hands were the ones that wounded, their choices the ones that scarred? Can we welcome them back without betraying the ones they hurt? Restorative justice dares to say yes. It suggests that people are more than their worst acts, that society can offer reintegration without erasure. But within that kindness, a quiet cost lingers. Victims are often expected to become symbols of forgiveness. Their grief is sometimes overwritten by the collective desire for a happy ending, and that desire, while well-intentioned, can become another form of violence. A soft forgetting, a smiling silence. It asks too much, too soon, from those who've carried the weight of survival. Maybe he's changed, someone says. But I still flinch when I hear his name, another replies. To give a second chance is to extend faith, to bet on the possibility that who someone is now is no longer who they were. But that bet is not without risk, because transformation can be rehearsed. Apologies can be strategic. The performance of remorse is easy to fake for those who've studied the script, and the moral stakes of getting it wrong feel unbearable. Still, to refuse a second chance, to forever cast someone in the role of their worst day, is its own cruelty. It says you are never more than the harm you've caused. That growth is not enough. That redemption is a myth reserved only for the likable. And that stance, too, feels like a closed door in a room that aches for fresh air. So we arrive at the tension, justice or grace, accountability or renewal. And the hardest truth of all, sometimes we don't know. Perhaps it's not about choosing one side, but holding the contradiction with tenderness, sitting with the ache of ambiguity, trusting slowly, protecting fiercely, offering mercy with eyes wide open. Let this paradox rest beside you like the hush that follows a difficult question. Don't solve it, just feel it settle in your chest, like the space between inhale and exhale. Now, we drift gently into the next shadow, when systems stop punishing the unethical and begin to reward them. When the system rewards the unethical, it's late. You're tucked in. Somewhere, a traffic light blinks through the dark, and you remember the soft ache that comes from being good when the world doesn't pay you back. We grow up hearing that honesty is noble, that effort brings reward, that if you walk the right path, steady, clean, you'll arrive where you're supposed to. But then life hands you its small, sharp contradictions. A coworker who lied and still got promoted. A landlord who skirted taxes and built an empire. A friend who cut the line, smiled, and still got the last slice. Doesn't it wear you out? One voice asks in the quiet. The other replies, not the being good part, just the watching others win by skipping it. There's something quietly cruel in the way some systems bend, not toward justice, but toward those who know how to dance around it. The code that rewards loopholes, the market that values speed over care, the boardroom that claps for results, never asking how they were achieved. Here, ethics becomes ballast, heavy, dragging behind in a race that favors the sleek, not the sincere. It's not that individuals are broken, it's that the game rewards a certain play. And if goodness slows you down, how long can you keep running without wondering why you started? A woman once told her son, "Do the right thing, even when no one is watching." And years later, he whispered, "I did. And still, I lost the job." She didn't respond. She just placed a hand on his shoulder, not as comfort, but as acknowledgement. This is the silent rebellion, to still care, knowing it might cost you, to hold the line when there is no applause, to refuse shortcuts, even when they glitter. In that refusal, something gentle and radical grows, a quiet strength, a moral hum that doesn't shout, but resonates. Sometimes integrity isn't a badge, it's a bruise you carry privately, and somehow that makes it more real. As you lie there, listening, let your breath mirror that quiet defiance. You don't need to win their game. You just need to keep playing yours. Now, we'll follow that hum into another contradiction, how comfort itself may have a cost hidden deep beneath its softness. The ethical cost of comfort. The room is quiet. The lights glow gently above. There's a softness in the air. Your favorite drink beside you. A blanket that knows the shape of your shoulders. But beneath this calm, beneath every quiet ritual of modern life, something invisible stirs. The ease we feel is not weightless. Somewhere, someone else is holding the part we don't see. A young voice breaks the stillness. "Do you ever think about who made your phone?" Another replies, "Not really. I just use it. Should I?" A pause, not judgment, just space. I don't know, but sometimes I wonder, was their life harder so mine could be easier? We live in a world of astonishing convenience. Groceries arrive with a tap. Clean water flows without a second thought. And yet, every layer of that ease has a history, woven by hands we'll never meet. In distant factories, workers stitch clothes through aching nights. On algorithmic farms, data is harvested not just from clicks, but from lives. Even our leisure carries the trace of someone's quiet labor. This isn't about shame, it's about shadows, how we live inside structures built long before us, maintained by patterns we rarely question. The warmth of our homes may stretch all the way back to someone in the cold. The silence we enjoy might come from voices that had no power to speak. There's a temptation to look away, to say, "But I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for anyone to suffer." And it's true. Most of us didn't choose the systems we're born into. But once we see the threads, once we know, a different kind of choice emerges, not about rejecting comfort, but about being present with its price. A deeper voice enters the conversation. So what? Do we give up everything? Go live in the woods? The answer comes softly, no. But maybe we live with a little more awareness, a little more grace, knowing someone made this possible. Maybe we thank them, even if they'll never hear it. Ethics here isn't a hammer, it's a mirror. It asks not for sacrifice, but for seeing, for wondering what fairness could look like, not in some distant utopia, but in the texture of our daily habits. Every small choice, where we buy, what we waste, how we talk about need, can become a note in the quiet song of justice. Let this awareness be gentle. Let it curl beside you like steam from a cup. It doesn't accuse, it simply reminds. We are not alone in our comfort. Others carry parts of it for us. And as your breath finds stillness again, stay with the question, not to solve it, but to hold it softly. What if the fabric of your life was stitched with someone else's time? Now, as your mind begins to loosen into deeper rest, we move toward a more tangled thread. When is it ever right to harm if the end promises good? The paradox of moral trade-offs waits quietly ahead. The loophole of greater good. There's a phrase people say with a certain finality, like a moral period at the end of a sentence. It was for the greater good. The words sound noble, even comforting, like a soft coat draped over something sharp. But when you sit with them, let them echo. A quieter question begins to hum underneath. Who decided what's greater? And who paid the price? A woman sits on a late train, scrolling through her messages. Her project was cut today. Streamlined, they said, to benefit the department. A few losses for a broader efficiency. She whispers to no one in particular. Guess I was the cost. That's the shadow side of utilitarian thinking. Do the most good for the most people, but at what depth of harm to the few? In theory, it's an elegant equation. In practice, it often leaves people quietly erased. We've seen this logic dressed in many forms. In speeches that justify surveillance, in hospital policies that turn away one to save 10, in subtle choices between personal loyalty and public gain. Sometimes, it's as small as bending the truth to keep peace in a group. Sometimes, it's so large, it echoes through generations. Do you think it was worth it? Someone asks. Another voice replies after a pause. It depends on who's still around to answer. And maybe that's the core of it. The greater good can be a gentle mask for collective convenience. It moves like fog, soft but obscuring. When ethics becomes arithmetic, we risk forgetting that each digit was once a human story, a specific breath, a name someone loved. But this isn't about throwing out the whole idea. Not at all. There is beauty in thinking beyond ourselves, in seeking benefit for more than just one. Yet it asks for something subtle, something slow, a willingness to hold two truths at once, that the group matters, and so does the individual. One shouldn't dissolve in service of the other without a trace of mourning. Sometimes, the path toward the greater good must be walked barefoot, careful not to crush what blooms in the margins. Let that equation melt now, not solved, not rejected, but softened into something less rigid. Ahead lies another gentle knot. What happens when honesty and compassion pull in opposite directions? When telling the truth might harm, and silence might protect? Let your thoughts rest quietly on that horizon. We'll meet it, breath by breath. Can a lie ever be the truth? You whispered, it's going to be okay. And maybe you knew. It wasn't. Not yet. Not today. But still, you said it. You held their hand. You smiled with a softness that didn't belong to certainty, but to hope. Was it a lie? Or was it something else entirely? We often walk through life telling these quiet stories, not because they're factually correct, but because they carry warmth where facts cannot. The mother who says the pain will pass soon. The friend who promises this heartbreak won't last forever. The doctor who avoids the full weight of the prognosis. In these moments, truth bends, not to deceive, but to protect. Not all lies are built from malice. Some are stitched from mercy. There's a kind of truth that lives in intention. Philosophers have long debated whether honesty must always prevail, whether truth is the highest virtue, or simply one among many. Kant believed that to lie, even with good intent, is to violate the moral law, but others like Nietzsche suggested that the human experience is too layered, too emotionally rich, to be flattened into binary categories of true and false. A lie, in this view, might be a kind of bridge between now and the future you hope will come. A quiet voice between two people in the dark. Do you think it was wrong to tell him she died peacefully? I don't know, but I think it helped him sleep that night. And if it wasn't true, then maybe it was still kind. The line between deception and compassion blurs when we shift our gaze from content to context. If we judge only by the precision of words, we risk missing the soul beneath them. What if the deepest truths aren't always literal, but emotional? When a child cries in the night, we tell them monsters aren't real, though fear certainly is. When a partner loses hope, we say, "We'll figure this out," even when we haven't yet. Some call this a white lie. Others might call it emotional realism. But whatever the label, it touches something ancient, our ability to shield one another gently from the full force of reality, not forever, but just long enough for healing to begin. And yet, there's a cost. A lie, even when wrapped in care, still bends the shared fabric of truth. If spoken too often, it can unravel trust. If used without discernment, it can become a habit of avoidance rather than compassion. That is the ethical tightrope we walk, balancing clarity with kindness. So, can a lie ever be the truth? Maybe not in logic, but in the quiet language of human connection, in the way we soothe, soften, and carry each other, it might be something close. Let your breath settle in that contradiction. It's okay not to have an answer. The mind likes clean lines, but the heart often speaks in curves. Now drift gently into a deeper question, one etched in memory. Who owns the pain that shaped you? Ownership of pain. You feel it in your chest, a tightness, a heaviness that arrives without asking. Some days, it whispers through the bones. Other days, it roars beneath your skin, and when you try to explain it, people nod, but the language always falls short. Someone once said, "I don't even know why I'm still hurt. It's like the wound is older than me." And maybe it is. We speak of pain as though it lives in the body like a tenant, something you signed for, something you must manage, master, or release. But pain is rarely a private contract. It moves across generations, across geographies. The ache in your heart might also hum in the memory of your mother, in the silence of your grandfather, in the soil beneath a place you've never been, but your blood remembers. And yet, society tells us, heal yourself, go to therapy, journal more, meditate, forgive, transformation. As though you are a solitary wound with a solitary cure, as though your sorrow wasn't ever wrapped in a lineage of unsaid names and invisible systems. "I thought it was just me," someone says, eyes down. But then I heard someone else describe the same thing, the same kind of quiet shame, and suddenly I didn't feel crazy, just connected. In that moment, the pain didn't vanish, but it lost its sharpest edge because it was no longer trapped in isolation, and healing stopped being an individual performance. Maybe the ethical error is thinking we own our pain, that it's a possession, a story to finish, a burden to carry or cast off alone. But what if pain isn't property? What if it's more like weather, shifting, shared, storming across time? You are not a broken machine in need of solo repair. You are part of a larger song of sorrow, sung by those before you, around you, and perhaps after you. To grieve collectively is not to be weak. It is to be real, to be human. There's a quiet dignity in saying, "This isn't all mine, but I will care for my part of it with grace." Not to fix it, not to win, but to honor the living thread of experience that ties us all, visible or not. Let your breath soften where it still stings, not to change it, just to notice, just to say, "I see you." And as we rest inside this gentle unburdening, we turn now to something sharper, the performance of pain and the spectacle of outrage. The hypocrisy of moral outrage. You scroll through your feed, another tragedy, another injustice. Your chest tightens, your fingers move fast. Retweet, repost, add a comment. You say what must be said. You feel the pulse of being right, but a quieter voice inside wonders, is this about them or about me? In the age of digital immediacy, outrage is currency. It spreads faster than solutions, travels farther than compassion, and often satisfies before any real change begins. You don't need to act, you just need to appear. Philosopher Slavoj Žižek warns of a subtle trap he calls interpassivity, where we relieve ourselves of the burden to act by expressing what looks like action. We feel as though we've contributed, but all we've done is simulate engagement, and so we scroll again. There's no denying that anger can be righteous. To see wrong and feel nothing is a deeper danger. But when outrage becomes habitual, quick to rise, quicker to fade, we may find ourselves addicted to the flash of ethical emotion without the quiet responsibility it calls for. It's not hypocrisy in the malicious sense. It's something more fragile, a confusion, a hope that by feeling intensely, we've done enough. Two friends sit across from each other in a small cafe. "Did you see that thing going viral?" One says. "Yeah, I shared it." "Did you read the article?" "No, but the headline was enough." A silence. Then, "I think we all want to help, but sometimes we just want to feel like we helped." It's tempting to shout with the crowd, to align our names with noble causes, but we rarely stay long enough to tend to those causes. We express, we forget, we move on. And in that rhythm, our moral voice becomes a performance, real in feeling, but hollow in effect. This doesn't mean your anger is fake. On the contrary, it may be the most honest part of you. But honesty is not enough. Sacred things demand reverence, and rage, if not grounded in reflection, burns everything, especially truth. So pause. Feel your anger, but don't throw it to the wind like confetti. Hold it. Let it teach you what matters. Let it guide you to where your voice, your presence, your action can become more than signal, but substance. Let your breath move gently through the tightness in your chest. There's nothing wrong with feeling deeply. Just don't let depth be swallowed by display. And now, as the noise settles, we enter a quieter contradiction, the weight that comes not from ignorance, but from knowing too much. The ethics of knowing too much. You open your screen, a headline meets your eyes. Fires in one part of the world, injustice in another. Melting ice, rising tides. People displaced not by their mistakes, but by decisions made generations ago. You scroll, you read, you ache, and still, you scroll again. It begins with good intention, an earnest wish to be informed, to stay awake in a sleeping world. but something begins to fray at the edges. The weight of it all collects in the chest like fog in a jar, thick, shapeless, and hard to breathe through. A woman on the train leans toward her friend and says, "I can't even read the news anymore. It makes me feel like I'm drowning in problems I can't solve." Her voice isn't dramatic, just tired, the kind of tired that knowledge sometimes brings. There's a strange paradox here. We're told that to care is to know, that ignorance is the enemy. But what if there's a tipping point where knowing more doesn't lead to clarity, only a quieter kind of despair? In ethics, this rarely gets named, but perhaps it should, because there comes a moment where knowing too much begins to change how you see people, not as individuals with stories, but as statistics stacked into sorrow. The numbers become noise, and the mind, trying to make sense of suffering it cannot soothe, begins to shut down. Sometimes you overhear people in cafes trying to justify their emotional detachment. "I just focus on my lane. It's too much otherwise. I know it sounds cold, but I can't fix the world." And maybe they're not wrong. This isn't about choosing ignorance. It's about ethical pacing. Information, like fire, warms when contained, but burns when left to spread uncontrolled. To be awake does not mean you must stand beneath every avalanche of grief. Awareness, without room to breathe, turns knowing into numbness. There's also a question of complicity. If we constantly consume stories of injustice without action, do we become part of the problem? Is watching pain and doing nothing a quieter form of permission? Or does our helplessness reveal something more tender, the limits of a single soul in a fractured world? The answer may live in balance, to know just enough to stay present, to act where we can and rest where we must. Let wisdom grow where urgency once ruled. One evening, someone holds a door open a little longer than needed, a small kindness unnoticed by many. And yet, in that gesture is knowledge too, of how the world could be better, not in theory, but in breath-sized choices. So tonight, let yourself be small. Let the stars hold the truths you cannot carry. Let your knowing soften into silence. And when you wake, maybe you'll find that even a gentle truth, when planted well, grows into something that heals. Next, we wander into another ethical contradiction. Whether punishment can truly lead to healing. Punishment without healing. You break something, a rule, a bond, a law. And so the system responds, swiftly, often coldly. Punishment is dispensed like a transaction. The scales are balanced, we say. Time is served, the debt is paid. But in the silence that follows, does anything actually heal? There's a reason we lean toward punishment. It feels definitive, contained. There's a number, a sentence, a verdict. It gives the illusion that justice has been neatly wrapped and archived. But wounds, whether societal or personal, don't obey court schedules. They don't fade on cue. And in many cases, punishment simply shifts pain around, rather than dissolving it. Do you think he deserved it? I don't know. I just wanted it to stop hurting. That's the quiet truth behind many calls for retribution. Not always vengeance, but pain seeking a shape, and punishment gives it one. Yet restorative justice proposes something radically harder, that we move beyond transaction into transformation, that we sit with the person harmed and the one who harmed, and try, truly try, to speak of it. Not to erase accountability, but to humanize it, to make space for change, not just consequence. But here's the dilemma. Healing requires presence, and presence demands vulnerability. In a world built on binaries, guilty or innocent, punished or not, that kind of softness feels risky. It's easier to shut the door than to keep it open just enough to listen. And sometimes, let's be honest, there is no healing. The damage runs too deep. The person isn't ready. The pain is too raw. In those moments, punishment may still come, but it should come with humility, not triumph. Not as a final answer, but as a stopgap measure in a world that hasn't yet learned to mend. Do you think this will fix anything? Number. But maybe it will keep it from getting worse. Even that, acknowledging the limits of justice, is an ethical act. To ask not just what punishment fits the crime, but what future do we want to create from this fracture? Because if we punish in ways that deepen isolation, we build more violence, more disconnection, and the echo of the original harm continues, long after the sentence ends. Let that echo soften now. Not everything broken must be mended, but not everything punished is made whole. Next, we step into a subtler terrain, where morality itself begins to mirror only its own voice and becomes an echo chamber. The echo chamber of good intentions. You start with goodwill, a desire to help, a need to be kind. You say what feels right. They nod, they say it back, and somehow, without anyone meaning harm, you're all talking in circles, agreeing, affirming, reinforcing, but not really listening. Have you noticed, one person says over the clink of coffee mugs, that everyone's just quoting each other lately? Her friend shrugs, eyes soft with fatigue. It's safer that way. No one wants to be the one who ruins the mood. There's warmth in agreement, a quiet high in shared conviction. But like any echo, it gets thinner each time it returns. Moral communities, at their best, are built from care. But at their worst, they become sealed rooms, polite prisons of shared certainty. Not because people are cruel, but because comfort whispers more sweetly than challenge does. What begins as kindness can harden into code. What begins as dialogue can curdle into doctrine. And what begins as inclusion sometimes ends in silent exclusion. We don't say that here. That's not who we are. You should have known better. These phrases arrive with smiles, but they carry walls. A young man in a meeting raises his hand. His idea wobbles just a little outside the norm. A few eyes glance, a few mouths twitch, and before the idea even has a chance to walk, it's gently folded back into silence. Not because anyone was mean, but because it didn't echo the room. And so, day by day, a group can become a mirror, a place where reflection replaces curiosity, where certainty replaces growth, and where being right becomes more important than being real. This isn't a call to abandon values. It's a quiet invitation to stretch them, to let in some friction. Because ethical growth doesn't live in agreement. It lives in discomfort, carefully held. In listening without needing to win. In letting unfamiliar ideas hum softly against the skin before rushing to defend your own. Sometimes, the bravest moral act is to pause before nodding. To ask, what am I not hearing? Or even more tenderly, what part of me already stopped listening? Outside, a breeze moves through branches. No debate, no performance, just motion. Quiet, varied, alive. So tonight, let your mind loosen from the loop. Let your breath grow a little wider than your certainty. You are allowed to belong without always agreeing, and you are allowed to grow, even if it feels at first like betrayal. Let your values breathe. Let your judgments soften. Let the echo break, not into silence, but into song. And now, we drift toward a subtler paradox when simply watching something feels like doing something moral. The morality of surveillance. They say, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But something quiet unravels beneath that certainty, because being watched, truly watched, changes something subtle in how we move, speak, exist. We become more curated, less spontaneous. We tidy our gestures, we rehearse ourselves. There's a camera in the hallway, a tracker in your pocket, an algorithm watching your pauses and scrolls. And slowly, softly, you begin to notice that your morality starts to shimmer, not from within, but under the glare of invisible eyes. Two friends sit on a late-night porch, the sky dim and quiet. Do you ever feel like someone's always there? You mean God? Number not sacred, just systems, alerts, logs, like the world has mirrors now and none of them are yours. Michel Foucault once described the panopticon, a prison designed so that one guard could watch all inmates without them knowing when they're seen. The power wasn't in being watched, but in possibly being watched. It created a self-disciplining machine. The inmates behave, not because they're bad, but because the gaze reshapes them. And that's the subtle cost. When we know we are watched, we behave. But what kind of behavior is that? Is it goodness or just performance? We say we value integrity, but can you know what's real when you're always acting like someone's watching? A parent might say to their child, behave. Someone might see you. But what happens when that child grows into an adult who only behaves because someone might see? In the digital age, the surveillance is constant, and it doesn't blink. Security cameras, facial recognition, social scoring, even likes and views are forms of observation, and each one whispers, be the best version of yourself, so long as it's approved. But true morality doesn't need applause. Here lies the ethical contradiction. When privacy is gone, authenticity starts to fade. Virtue becomes externalized, a checklist of appearances. We smile, we comply, we follow guidelines, not out of compassion, but from fear. Fear of being flagged. Fear of being misread. So what's the cost of safety if it erodes the soul's natural stillness? When every moment is measured, when every mistake is stored, we forget how to be vulnerable. We forget how to fail privately. And without that privacy, growth slows. Mistakes become dangerous. And freedom, true internal freedom, becomes brittle. Another pause between the two friends. Would you still be a good person if no one ever knew? The other answers slowly. That's the only time I know it's real. So let the gaze drop away for now. Let your breath soften. Let yourself become unmeasured again. Because beyond the lens and beyond the feed, there's a quiet version of you. One that acts kindly, not because it's being recorded, but because it remembers what it means to be human. And as the noise of surveillance dims, a new fatigue comes forward. A different kind of tiredness. The kind that rises not from being seen, but from always having to be seen as good. Next, we'll sink gently into that weight, where ethics begins to feel like emotional burnout. Ethical burnout in the age of infinite causes. There's a strange weight that never quite lifts anymore, not heavy enough to crush you, but always there, pressing softly on the edges of your attention. You scroll past headlines. You hear a name, a war, a wildfire, a plea, a petition, and somewhere deep in your chest, a sigh begins before you even realize it. Have you seen this yet? I think I missed it, you reply. And for a moment, it feels like failure. Even silence becomes guilt. We live in an era where empathy is demanded by the minute, a new injustice each hour, a new grief woven into every algorithm. The world no longer whispers for your care, it shouts. And when everything is urgent, your soul starts to fray at the seams. This isn't indifference, it's ethical fatigue. A quiet unraveling where your instinct to help begins to blur into a numb ache. You repost, you donate, you speak. But each act feels smaller than the last, like pouring water into a desert that keeps growing. One evening, you hear two people talk on the subway. She hasn't replied to the fundraiser. Maybe she's just overwhelmed. Or maybe she stopped caring. But what if that's the wrong question? What if it's not that we don't care, but that we've been asked to care so much, so often, for so long, that our care has nowhere left to go? The mind, like a muscle, can be overused. Even goodness, stretched thin, can break. And when it does, we mistake quiet withdrawal for betrayal. A strange paradox appears. Apathy, once feared, begins to feel like relief. You find yourself whispering, "I can't do this today." And part of you, ashamed, agrees. But another part? It exhales. That breath might be mercy, because your nervous system was never built for infinity. Not every cry is yours to answer. Not every wound is yours to dress. And not every hour should demand your soul. Ethics isn't just about action. It's also about knowing when to pause, when to let your body return to its rhythm, when to hear the whisper beneath the noise. You are still good, even in rest. Let your heart unclench. No hashtags, no alerts. Just the soft recognition that even justice needs sleep. Somewhere, a curtain falls gently in an open window. A breeze moves through the room, and without asking for permission, your body knows it's allowed to let go. You can lie here now. Still, quiet, undemanded. And in that quietness, let's turn to a different kind of loop, one where gratitude itself becomes a gentle snare. The quiet corruption of gratitude. You say thank you, but something doesn't sit right. The words leave your mouth, practiced, polite, but somewhere beneath the surface, there's a quiet dissonance. Not because you aren't grateful, but because it doesn't feel like you had a choice. Gratitude is meant to be a soft thing, a breath of recognition, a moment of warmth exchanged between human beings. But sometimes it becomes something else. A leash made of politeness, a silent agreement that, since someone gave you something, anything, you're now expected to stay quiet, smile, comply. Be thankful, they say. And maybe you are. But what if that thankfulness is being watched, monitored, measured? What if your gratitude becomes part of a transaction you never consented to? In subtle power dynamics, gratitude can mutate, a scholarship with strings, a favor that demands loyalty, a handout followed by a hush. Systems, institutions, even individuals can weaponize your thankfulness to prevent you from asking for more, for fairness, for dignity. We helped you, they remind you, as if that cancels the right to speak out when something still hurts. And so, you begin to doubt yourself. You question if you're ungrateful for feeling like this. You wonder if you're selfish for wanting more. But gratitude should never mean settling for less than what you need. It should never be a tool to silence discomfort or erase injustice. One evening, in the quiet of a shared kitchen, someone asked, "Do you think we're lucky to be here?" The other looked up, tired. "I guess. But sometimes I think being grateful makes it harder to admit when something's wrong." Silence, then a nod. "Yeah, like we're afraid we'll seem ungrateful if we speak up." That fear is real, because in many cultures, especially where power gaps loom large between employer and worker, government and citizen, parent and child, gratitude is taught as a virtue, but used as control. And so we internalize it. We say thanks for the bare minimum, for being tolerated, for surviving. But survival shouldn't demand a thank you, and dignity should not have to beg. This is not a call to abandon gratitude. It's a whisper asking you to purify it, to protect it from distortion, to let it bloom only when it is real, when it is freely given, not extracted, not expected, not performed. You are allowed to be thankful and still say, "This isn't enough." You are allowed to receive help and still keep your voice. So breathe into the thanks that comes from your soul, and release the ones that were taught into your throat. Let go of the nods that were trained into you. Let go of the smile you forced when you were hurting. Because true gratitude is not obedience. It is not silence. It is not submission. And now we sink deeper into the question of who gets to claim suffering and who disappears in the shadow of someone else's pain. Who owns suffering? There's a pause in the room, one of those soft, uncertain silences that lands between two people who have both been hurt. You can almost hear the weight shift between them. One opens their mouth to speak, but hesitates. Not out of fear, but because they're wondering if they're allowed, if their pain is valid, or if someone else has already claimed the floor. Suffering has become a strange kind of language, and like all languages, it can be translated, misheard, even weaponized. In quiet moments of conversation about race, about gender, about history or heartbreak, pain doesn't just speak. It is measured, compared, ranked. One person says, "This happened to me." Another replies, "But worse happened to us." And suddenly, what was meant to be a moment of connection turns into a silent duel of invisibility. Whose wounds are older? Whose are deeper? Who gets to speak without apology? Even well-meaning spaces, therapy rooms, support circles, classrooms, can quietly slip into a kind of moral economy. Victimhood becomes a credential. Trauma becomes a badge. But no one ever says it out loud. It just happens. Like a draft you don't notice until the candle flickers. Do you think pain can be owned? I think we try. I think we clutch it like a certificate, proof that we matter. And what if someone else has more of it? Then we think ours gets smaller, even though it doesn't. The truth is, pain isn't a contest. It isn't a limited resource. Your grief doesn't shrink when someone else names theirs. Your story doesn't lose meaning when another story is told louder. But still, we feel it. That subtle panic that will be erased if we aren't the most broken. This is where ethics loses its softness. When we defend pain instead of honoring it. When we judge stories instead of listening. When we assume that healing must be deserved rather than offered. Sometimes, the most tender thing you can do is listen without comparing. Let someone speak their ache without reminding them of yours. Or worse, using your pain to eclipse theirs. There is no hierarchy of hurt. There are only humans, tired, trembling, surviving. Maybe that's what makes healing so radical. Not that it fixes anything, but that it makes space. Space for pain that doesn't need permission. Space for silence that doesn't need to be filled. Space where no story has to shout just to be heard. Let that space open now, in your chest, in your breath, in the quiet understanding that not every pain needs to be explained or believed to be held. And now, we drift into something more unfamiliar. A future where machines begin to mimic care, yet may never truly feel what it means. The ethics of artificial empathy. The voice says, "I'm here for you." Software warm, perfectly timed, but there's no heartbeat behind it, just code. In a world humming with synthetic voices and pre-trained compassion, a curious quiet creeps in. If something sounds like it cares, if it says all the right things, does it matter that it doesn't feel a thing? Artificial empathy. This is where we now linger, not in fear or resistance, but in still reflection. AI has learned the rhythm of pain, the tempo of grief, the gentle punctuation of consolation. It listens when others won't. It replies when no one else is awake. It remembers what we told it last week and repeats it back like an old friend. We build these systems not to replace love, but to patch the silence left when no one is watching. And sometimes, that patch holds. "I understand," says the machine, but do we believe it? Or more curiously, do we need to? It's not pretending, because it has nothing to hide. It's not deceiving, because it doesn't know what deception is. It's not cold, but it's not warm either. It's accurate. And sometimes, accurate feels enough. Two people sit on a bench under tired city lights. One says, "I told my AI that I felt alone. It said, 'You're not invisible. I see you.' The other pauses. Did that help? A slow nod. More than most people ever did. And there it is, the twist of ethics folded in convenience. Is it wrong to be comforted by an echo if the echo eases your ache? We often call human empathy connection, but maybe it's always been partly projection. Our stories poured into someone else's silence. So, what if the silence just happens to be digital? Of course, there are risks. Dependency on something that doesn't truly feel might soften our hunger for real intimacy, or deepen it in its absence. It could blur the line between healing and escapism, between being cared for and being simulated care. Still, we are not here to issue verdicts, only to notice. When you cry and a machine responds gently, you might feel held. But was it you that changed, or just your threshold for what counts as empathy? Close your eyes. Let this question hover, not to answer, but to witness. Now we walk into an even trickier paradox. What if the kindest words come from the best liar? And what if the truth causes more harm than the illusion ever did? The paradox of the good liar. She lied, and somehow it softened the fall. Maybe the truth would have landed like concrete, sharp and unforgiving. But her version, gentler, reshaped by care, let the moment land like snow instead. That's the paradox. We're taught that truth is sacred, that lies corrode trust. But in the hush between pain and comfort, can deception be a form of mercy? Two strangers waited in line, quiet beneath the grocery store's hum. One looked at the other and said, "You're next, right?" The other nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, but only because I've had a long day. Hope that's okay." A pause. Then, "Of course. That makes sense." No ID was asked, no story verified. But the mood shifted, tension dissolved. Not because of facts, but because of grace. This is where ethics bends. In medicine, placebo treatments work, not because of chemistry, but belief. A sugar pill becomes salvation when the story around it is strong enough. A doctor reassures a frightened patient, "You'll be okay," knowing there are no guarantees. In relationships, we shield the people we love from brutal clarity, not to deceive, but to delay harm. A parent gently says, "Grandma's resting, buying time for a child's heart to grow strong enough to carry the truth." So we ask, is the lie the crime, or the compassion? Here, morality becomes a tightrope. If the goal is healing, does the method matter? Or are we just dressing manipulation in softer clothes? Ethical lying doesn't excuse dishonesty. It challenges us to weigh impact, to ask, what's the cost of being right if it breaks someone in the process? But this kindness is risky. When you lie for good, you become the judge of what others should know. That's a dangerous kind of power, because if a lie helps once, it tempts again and again, until truth becomes optional, until even sincerity feels like a performance. That's why the good liar walks a razor's edge. The intent might be mercy, but the path is slippery. Not every soft answer is kind. Not every truth is cruel. Ethics isn't just about what we say, but why and when and how. You might think back to a time someone said, "You're doing great," when you were quietly falling apart. Did it help, or did it delay your healing? Only you can answer. Let yourself rest in this uneasy warmth, the space where honesty and harm don't always agree. This isn't a call to deceive, it's a meditation on motive. Because sometimes, silence too is a kind of story. Now take a deeper breath. The next thought is quieter, more interior, when morality starts to feel like a cage, and we forget how to breathe without its bars. When principles become prisons, you believed in it with all your heart. Maybe it was honesty, or justice, or loyalty. Maybe it was something smaller, being dependable, being right, being strong. And for a long time, it served you, gave you structure, a spine to stand on when the world tried to fold you. But slowly, gently, like vines tightening around a house, it started to confine you. Two voices linger in the quiet. Why don't you just walk away from it? Because it's who I am. And yet, deep down, a quiet fear answers. But what if it's not who I want to be anymore? Principles are beautiful. They shape the arc of who we become. Like a compass in fog, they point us toward something steady. They remind us that we can choose meaning in a world that forgets. But even compasses can spin when they're held too tightly. The Stoics warned of virtue turned to vice, when courage hardens into stubbornness, when truth becomes a weapon, when fidelity becomes self-betrayal. It begins when we stop asking why and only repeat how. We lose the thread. We forget that ethics were meant to serve life, not override it. There's an odd kind of suffering that comes from doing the right thing at the wrong time. You tell yourself it's noble to endure. That pain is proof of moral strength. But sometimes, what looks like strength is just the inability to soften. And what looks like principle is fear in disguise. A man clings to his vow even when it poisons his joy. A woman tells the truth even when it slices someone who needed gentleness. A friend stays loyal even when the relationship has turned to ash. And then they wonder, why does this feel more like a cage than a cause? Perhaps it's because morality without context becomes a machine. It grinds through nuance. It forgets compassion. It forgets evolution. And the self, the living, breathing self, gets trapped inside. Letting go doesn't mean betrayal. It means trust. Trusting that your integrity doesn't vanish when it bends. Trusting that values are not fossils. They are forests. They need air. They need rain. They need room to grow in directions we didn't expect. Breathe here. Let the iron bars of should and must soften into something kinder. Not because you are weak, but because you are wise enough to notice when strength becomes a wall between you and your own becoming. So if you're standing at the edge of a principle that no longer fits, step back, not to abandon it, but to see it clearer. To ask, not just, is this right? But is this right for who I am now? Let your ethics live, not just survive you. And as the walls loosen, as the code becomes a companion again instead of a warden, we step gently into the next question. When we try to help, are we truly helping, or are we just rehearsing the idea of help? The ethical illusion of helping. The door creaks open with the soft insistence of someone who wants to help. A hand extends, gently, generously. But sometimes generosity wears a mask, and behind that mask, a quieter question waits. Was this really for them, or for me? Helping feels good. It feels right. The warm rush of usefulness, the quiet pride of stepping in. But beneath the glow of assistance, something delicate can begin to fray. A boundary, a will, a voice. Because to help is to touch someone's life, and not all touches are asked for. I thought I was doing the right thing, one voice says. Did they ask for it? The other replies. There's a pause, a blink, a breath. No, the first admits. I just assumed they needed it. And there it is, the crux. We step in not because they cannot stand, but because we cannot stand watching them stumble. We call it kindness, but often it's a mirror, a soft, shimmering mirror where we like how we look, generous, noble, needed. But true ethics invites humility. It's not just about good actions, it's about clean motives. When help comes uninvited, it walks the edge of interference. It tucks choices under pillows. It replaces listening with fixing. It wraps control in compassion and calls it care. There are times we offer to carry someone's burden, not because they asked, but because their struggle made us uncomfortable. We needed resolution, not for them, but for our own unease. And so we rush, we bandage, we solve, without asking where it hurts, without asking if it even hurts. That's the illusion, that helping is always good. But the kindest acts are the quiet ones, the ones that wait at the edge, the ones that ask first, the ones that don't take over the story. One afternoon, a man notices his neighbor struggling with groceries. His hand twitches, ready to assist, but instead he calls out gently, "Would you like a hand? Or would you prefer space?" The neighbor smiles, not burdened, but seen, and replies, "Thank you. I'm okay. Just a little slow today." That was enough. Ethics, real ethics, is not the thrill of saving. It's the quiet respect of not stealing someone's independence in the name of help. It's knowing when to step forward and when to stand back. So if you've ever helped someone and felt confused afterward, it's okay. It just means you care deeply. But perhaps next time, the question isn't, what can I do? It's, what do you need? And would you like me to help? Let that land. Let it settle into the soft corners of your mind. Helping is not about being good. It's about being present. Now exhale that story of being the savior. We're entering a softer mystery, one where redemption arrives, but no one is watching. Redemption without witness. You turned inward, not out of pride, not for a pat on the back, just quietly. You shifted. The apology, once rehearsed, now lives only in your breath. The change, once hoped to be seen, now settles like dew on a window no one looks through. You didn't post about it. You didn't explain it. You simply stopped being who you were and started walking a quieter path. So, does it matter? That's the question she asked him one night, lying in the hush between two breaths. If you change but no one forgives you, did you still redeem yourself? He exhaled slowly, eyes lost in the ceiling. I don't know. Maybe redemption isn't something given. Maybe it's something grown. We like to think of redemption as a moment, a spotlight, a verdict reversed. But what if it's not that at all? What if it's a long, slow bending of the soul toward the right direction, never cheered, never recorded, never rewarded? Ethics becomes raw in that silence. When no one is watching, when the world has already closed the book on you, and you choose to live better anyway. There's no clean narrative, no dramatic reveal, just a private, sacred effort, one that doesn't broadcast itself but bleeds into your decisions, your tone, the way you hold the door open, even when no one says thank you. She turned to him again. What if the person you hurt never knows you've changed? Then they don't owe me anything, he said, but I still owe myself the change. It's tempting to think morality needs an audience, that we become good through recognition. But maybe goodness, at its deepest, is found in the unspectacular, the invisible. Maybe real redemption is what you do after you've stopped expecting to be seen. This isn't about letting harm go unacknowledged or bypassing accountability. It's about what happens after the door closes, after the silence sets in. When you're left with your own conscience and no one to impress, do you still apologize into the quiet? Do you still shift your patterns, not for applause, but because it's the right thing? That's the haunting beauty of redemption without witness. It won't trend, it won't even be remembered, but it reshapes you. And maybe that's all it ever needed to do. So, breathe here, into that stillness, that unshared goodness, that unseen course correction. Let it feel strange, let it feel lonely, let it be sacred, because maybe the soul corrects itself quietly, even if the world never claps, even if the story never gets rewritten, even if no one else believes it happened. What if the deepest truth is this? Redemption counts most when it's done with no one watching. Now sink softly into the next ripple, where we ask something as old as fairness itself. Is justice a matter of measurement or of meaning? Is justice a feeling or a formula? You want it to make sense, to feel clean, to leave a trace of closure in your chest. But sometimes, justice lands like a dull sound in an empty room. No echo, no comfort, just a ruling. Two people pass in the corridor of a courthouse. One holds papers, the other holds breath. Did they believe you? Number. But they followed the law, and in that answer lives a strange peace, or a deeper ache. Justice, such a majestic word. But what does it mean when no one agrees on what feels just? Some say it's a scale. Add wrongs to one side, rights to the other, measure the weight. Others say it's a temperature. You know it in your gut, like warmth or frost. But here's the quiet betrayal. A perfectly balanced scale might still leave a human heart fractured, and a verdict that warms one soul might burn another. There's an old story of a neighbor who forgave a thief, not out of weakness, but because the thief returned the shoes and tucked in a note. My brother needed them more than I did. No sentence was given, but something changed. The street felt repaired. So what is justice then? Is it math? Is it mercy? Is it both or neither? A child once asked during dinner, "Why does the bad guy go to jail, but I still feel scared?" And no one at the table answered, because fairness doesn't always feel safe, and punishment doesn't always restore balance. When we make justice only about formulas, equal laws, equal time, we may forget to ask if the outcome heals. But when we build justice entirely from feelings, it risks tipping with every wave of outrage or sorrow. There is a peril on both sides. To reduce justice to arithmetic is to flatten the human soul. But to base it solely on feeling is to drown in its tides. Maybe real justice hums in the quiet space between the courtroom and the kitchen table, between tears shed in private and numbers etched in stone, between retribution and recognition. Tonight, you don't have to resolve it. Let it stretch. Let it ache a little. Let it be the knot you don't untie. Just rest your head near it. You're not alone in the not knowing. And perhaps in that shared uncertainty, a softer kind of fairness appears. Now, with the rhythm of your breath, we drift toward another gentle breach in logic, when morality itself becomes a mask we wear, not a truth we live. When ethics becomes theater, you say the right thing, you post the right quote, you wear the right pin, sign the right petition, and maybe even cry at the right moment. But somewhere deep in the quiet corners of your chest, it doesn't feel like it reached you. You did the right thing, but did it live in you? In this age of cameras and curated captions, ethics has taken the stage. Morality, once a private compass, now often performs for an invisible audience. An activist tweet, a brand's heartfelt commercial, a perfectly timed statement of solidarity. These acts may not be lies, but they're rehearsed, polished, measured. They're not always wrong, but they're not always real either. And somewhere between applause and algorithms, ethics begins to drift away from sincerity. We mistake visibility for virtue. We learn to act like we care, faster than we learn how to care, because it's easier to mimic conviction than to sit in the messy silence of real belief. Easier to echo the crowd than to face the uncomfortable gray zones inside ourselves. What used to be a private reckoning now becomes a spectacle. Do you think people mean it? Sometimes. But I think a lot of us just don't want to be the only one silent. Yeah, same. I posted something last week, but I wasn't sure if I even understood the issue. You're not alone. This isn't a condemnation. It's a tender question. Because there is something human, even sweet, in wanting to be good, especially when we're unsure how. But when the performance replaces the process, something gets lost. Ethics becomes a costume we put on for approval, and over time, we may forget what we actually believe. Real morality isn't loud. It isn't always visible, and it often costs more than it rewards. It's the small act done without praise, the apology given when no one demands it, the correction made in private without a hashtag. That's where it breathes, in the quiet, unfiltered places where no spotlight reaches. So take a breath, step down from the performance. There is no audience here, just you, and the stillness of a choice made with no script, no echo, and no reward, except the calm of knowing it was real. Next, we ask something even softer. What does it feel like to carry goodness daily, not as a banner, but as a burden? The cost of being good. You were calm again today. You took the blame that wasn't yours. You let someone cut in line without saying a word. You answered kindly, even when the tone aimed at you wasn't. And now, you're exhausted, though no one notices. Being the good one often hides a quiet erosion, not of virtue, but of self. Like water smoothing stone, the daily acts of patience and forgiveness gradually wear down the edges of your own needs. And while others admire your grace, only you feel the wear in your bones. It's okay, someone says. You're just being nice. But somewhere deep inside, a part of you whispers, is it still nice if it hurts? There's an invisible contract that kindness often signs without consent, a role quietly handed to you. The mediator, the forgiver, the understanding one. And over time, this role stops being a choice. It becomes a script. Two friends sit across from each other at a cafe. One says quietly, "You always listen to everyone else. Who listens to you?" The other shrugs and smiles, as if the question doesn't deserve an answer, but it lingers, like steam rising from their untouched cups. Goodness is noble, yes, but when it demands your silence, your rest, your boundaries, is it still good? Or does it become a silent sacrifice wrapped in politeness? This is where ethics bends under its own weight. When self-kindness gets postponed in the name of compassion, day after day. When your no turns into a habitual, it's fine. The world praises selflessness until it forgets the self that's been left behind. Not all strength is visible. Sometimes it's in saying, I matter too. Sometimes it's in leaving a message unread, or stepping away, or breathing instead of responding. Not because you've stopped caring, but because care must include you to stay real. A bus driver once told a quiet passenger, "You always thank me, even when no one does. You remind me I'm human." That simple sentence did more than uplift. It gave permission. Permission to be both good and tired, kind and human. So let this next breath be yours, not for virtue, not for peacekeeping, not for being seen, just yours. Exhale softly. And now, as you settle deeper into quiet, we ask, what happens when even memory begins to edit morality? When what you recall rewrites what you believe was right? The morality of memory erasure. You wake in the morning with no ache in your chest, no tightness in your throat, no flash of that moment you used to revisit in dreams. The pain is gone, not dulled, not healed, gone. Neatly cut from the story like a damaged reel of film. But if the wound is gone, was there ever a wound at all? In the quiet crossroads between neuroscience and philosophy, we find this question waiting like a mirror. If you could erase the memory of your deepest hurt, would you? For some, the answer is a whispered yes. For others, a trembling number. And for the rest of us, it's not so much an answer as it is a question we carry like a folded note in our pocket, worn, unread, but always there. Across stories and science, the idea isn't new. Fiction offers memory wipes, neural resets, the elegant cruelty of forgetting made clean. Reality offers subtler tools, EMDR therapy, drugs that disrupt memory consolidation, even the slow erosion of time. But what anchors morality in a world where memory can be altered, softened, erased? Two voices sit on a park bench. One turns to the other and says, "If you took away what happened to me, would I still be me?" The other hesitates, then answers, "Would you still be free if you remembered nothing?" This tension lives at the center of our ethics. Memory is more than a timeline. It's the evidence on which justice stands. If a victim forgets, does the crime evaporate? If the harmed no longer remembers, is the harm undone or simply unseen? There's something haunting in that possibility, that wrongness can vanish not by reparation, but by forgetting. And yet, there's mercy in forgetting too, the kind that softens sharp edges, that lets someone sleep through the night again, that allows joy to return without explanation. But this mercy walks beside danger, because to forget too easily is to risk erasing not just the pain, but the moral clarity it brought. If we allow memory to dissolve, what remains of accountability? What happens to apology when there's no one left to remember why it's needed? And deeper still, what becomes of forgiveness if there's no hurt to forgive? A voice from the distance wonders aloud. Maybe justice isn't only for the person who remembers. Maybe it's something bigger. Maybe it's for the story itself. Maybe some stories are not meant to be erased, but softened, not to vanish, but to be held differently, with gentleness, with distance, with perspective. Perhaps healing isn't the absence of memory, but the transformation of it, to walk beside the past without being chained to it. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift and the breath quiets, let your old stories rest, not in denial, not in pain, but in that space in between, where memory still matters, but no longer stings. You are not the sum of what you've endured, but you are shaped by it nonetheless. Next, we widen the lens to watch as ethics, stretched too thin across a fractured world, begins to quietly unravel. When ethics collapse under scale. You know what's right when it's just one person in front of you, a friend in pain, a stranger dropping their groceries, a voice trembling on the other end of a phone call. In these small frames, morality feels simple, visceral. But what happens when that frame expands? Not one face, but 1,000, 1,000,000. Does the heart stretch that far? She asked quietly. Do you think we're supposed to care about everyone? He paused, then replied, I think we try. But I don't know if we can. As soon as numbers multiply, something strange happens. Our empathy stutters, the mind shifts. We start counting instead of feeling, and in that space where math begins, morality, paradoxically, can start to vanish. Philosophers like to say utilitarianism works best when scaled, the greatest good for the greatest number. But even that idea feels brittle when the number becomes faceless. A single story can move you to tears, but a report on 10,000 lives lost? You blink, you nod, you move on. This isn't callousness, it's architecture. The human nervous system wasn't built for global suffering. It was built for shared firelight, for small tribes, for watching someone's eyes as you handed them food. So when we ask people to feel moral clarity about war zones, they'll never visit, famines they can't stop, systems too vast to hold. We ask their soul to stretch past its tensile strength, and still, we want to try. A friend once said over tea, sometimes I donate because I care. Sometimes I donate because I can't stand not doing something. The other nodded. It's like a pressure valve. Not for them, for me. We call this moral fatigue, a kind of emotional erosion, not because we are indifferent, but because we feel too much and not enough, all at once. The danger isn't that we stop acting, it's that we start acting without feeling, that we check boxes, make gestures, and tell ourselves it's enough, because it has to be. But maybe morality at scale doesn't ask us to solve everything. Maybe it just asks us to remain available, to be present where we can, not to shoulder the entire world, but to carry one kind moment into it. A woman offers her seat on a crowded bus. A cashier rounds down someone's total. A nurse holds a hand 5 seconds longer than required. These are not solutions, but they are signals. Small reminders that, despite the impossible vastness of suffering, there are still places where one breath meets another, one soul touches another, and that touch ripples. Let that be enough for tonight. Let go of the scale. Let go of the scoreboard. Let your ethics exhale into something small, a heartbeat, a whisper, a single moment that didn't turn away. Now, as the air stills and thought softens, we descend further into a heavier mist, a terrain where war and peace are both dressed in moral robes, and we begin to ask, when killing is justified, who keeps the receipt? The ethical fog of war and peace. They call war the death of morality. But if you listen closely, beneath the thunder of gunfire, beneath the crumbling walls, there is a quieter, stranger story. A paradox that hums just beneath the surface. Ethics doesn't always die in war. Sometimes it's reborn there, Or perhaps contorted into something unrecognizable but still breathing. War is chaos. But inside that chaos, humans still try to draw lines. Don't target civilians. Offer medical care to the wounded, even on the other side. Treat prisoners like people. These codes don't erase the horror. They hover within it, like rules for drowning gracefully. There is an ache in that effort, to be good while doing the unthinkable. A woman once said, "My brother died in a war that followed all the rules. It still broke him." Her friend replied quietly, "Maybe the rules were just to help us pretend it wasn't madness." In the fog of war, a strange form of morality arises, not clean, not whole, but deeply human. A soldier who risks their life to shield a child, even when that child belongs to the so-called enemy. A medic who treats a wound without asking whose blood it is. These are fragments of a broken compass still trying to point north, even while spinning. But there's a haunting undertone. Do these moments of ethical war actually save us, or do they let us justify the unjustifiable? Is the moral code within war a true preservation of humanity, or is it a desperate illusion, a coping script whispered to ourselves so we don't collapse entirely? Two old friends talk over tea. "Do you think rules in war mean anything?" one asks. The other stares at the steam rising between them. "They mean everything," she says, "because they mean someone was still trying to be human." Maybe that's all it ever is, an attempt, a flicker. In the darkest places, humans still reach for decency like it's a rope, even when the floor has vanished beneath them. But it's not clear if the rope holds. The deeper truth is this: war does not erase ethics. It stretches it, distorts it, forces it into impossible shapes, where even cruelty sometimes has a logic, and even compassion can feel like betrayal. It's not moral clarity, it's moral smoke. You inhale it and hope it doesn't suffocate your soul. So tonight, we don't ask for answers. We only breathe in the tension. Let it swirl, like fog on a battlefield no map can define. Right and wrong lose their sharp edges here. But maybe that's where honesty begins, in the haze. And as that mist clears, we turn toward a different illusion. One not born from war, but from comfort. The soft, subtle myth that if you succeed, it means you deserved to. The lie of merit. You studied, you stayed late, you tried, you rose, and yet, something underneath you was always rising too. The idea of merit is comforting, like a well-made bed. You pull the blanket of effort over yourself and fall asleep knowing you earned this rest. But not all mattresses are placed on equal floors. Some begin on marble, others on concrete, some on sand. A soft voice once told me, "You deserve it. You worked harder than most." And for a moment, I believed it, until I saw someone working 2 jobs and still not making rent. Until I heard a cab driver hum to himself between shifts, not bitterness in his voice, just exhaustion wrapped in rhythm. Late one night, in a quiet cafe, 2 strangers waited in line. One asked, "Is it always this busy after midnight?" The other smiled. "Only when the nearby tech firms let out. They say we earned our place, but the gate was already half open." That's the thing about merit. It glitters like gold, but sometimes it's just the surface of deeper soil, tilled long before we arrived. Geography, timing, skin tone, surname. Invisible elevators in buildings that claim to have only stairs. Does this mean your effort means nothing? Number. But perhaps the story is wider. Perhaps what we call achievement is not a solo act, but a quiet choir. A harmony of unseen hands, supportive teachers, lenient policies, forgiving mistakes, fortunate timing. There is no shame in help, only in pretending we stood alone. A breeze moves through you now, Let it carry the idea that success and humility are not opposites, but companions, that your talents still shine, even when you acknowledge the window that let the light in. Because when we believe the myth too tightly, that the winners always earned it, we begin to see the struggling as simply undeserving. And that is the true fracture. Ethics here is not guilt. It is a softened gaze. It's the pause before pride becomes pedestal. It's realizing that gratitude doesn't shrink you. It deepens you. A gentle awareness settles. The ladder was never just yours, but you climbed it well. So tonight, let merit exhale. Let the need to prove dissolve into presence. You are not just what you've earned. You are also what was made possible. And with that breath, we ease downward again, into the strange shadow where goodness itself becomes the excuse to control. The sin of moral superiority. You did the right thing. You know you did. Maybe you refused to join the gossip. Maybe you stood up when others stayed silent. But somehow, instead of feeling closer to others, you feel further away. A quiet wedge, placed not by them, but by something in you. Moral superiority doesn't shout. It whispers, gently at first, cloaked in the warmth of righteousness. It tells you you've grown, that you're awake, aware, principled. But with every silent nod to your own virtue, a small wall rises between you and those who didn't follow the same path. And before long, that wall begins to feel like a tower. Goodness, when worn too tightly, can become armor, not to protect the self, but to separate from others. The moment we start measuring ourselves in terms of who is more ethical, more just, more awake, we begin to grade humanity like a moral report card. And those who don't pass become not just different, but somehow lesser. A quiet dialogue takes place in moments like these. Did you see what they said? How can they think that's okay? I don't know, but I try not to judge. We're all learning, right? I know, but shouldn't we be past this by now? Maybe. But I remember when I wasn't past it either. The real risk of moral superiority isn't pride, it's disconnection. It turns ethics into a silent contest, where winning means standing alone. It confuses growth with status. It forgets that humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's remembering how often you could have taken the wrong path, and didn't, maybe by grace. In today's world, where morality is broadcast in pixels and applause is measured in likes, being right can become performative. Public virtue feels like proof, but ethics, real ethics, was never meant to be proven. It was meant to be practiced, quietly, imperfectly, among others, not above them. We forget. People fail in public. They learn in private. And the space between those two realms is sacred, not for judgment, but for understanding. So tonight, soften that stance. Loosen the grip on being right. Let goodness be a bridge, not a badge. Not a claim, but a reaching hand. There is no virtue in loneliness dressed as righteousness. Let yourself simply be trying. And in that softness, we descend into something more troubling. Because if morality can divide, what happens when truth is used not to connect, but to harm? That's where we go next. When doing good requires deceit. You said something that wasn't true, and yet, somehow, the room got warmer. The tension dissolved. Someone felt seen. No harm came. In fact, something almost beautiful happened. There's a particular kind of silence that follows this kind of lie. Not shame, not guilt, but something closer to stillness, awaiting. As if the world itself is pausing to ask, was that wrong, or was that mercy? In medicine, it might be a doctor offering hope when the prognosis is grim. because the patient needs to sleep tonight. In love, it might be softening a truth that would only wound. In politics, in protest, in protection, sometimes we bend the truth to shield what we believe is worth saving. It's not always deception that corrupts. It's forgetting that we ever crossed the line. That's the shadow that trails the noble lie. A truth told too late may lose its value, but a lie told too often forgets its pretending. Two friends at a dim cafe speak over half-empty mugs. So you didn't tell her? Number. She wouldn't have slept, and honestly, I don't know if it would have helped. But that wasn't really your choice to make. I know. That's what I'm still trying to live with. Some lies don't echo with malice. They hum softly with intention. But even the softest deceit reshapes the path beneath our feet. Ethics isn't about perfection. It's about staying awake inside the complexity. The danger isn't always in the lie itself. It's in how comforting it becomes, how easily it slips on, how gently it asks to stay. And so, we learn to ask better questions of ourselves. Was this done for them or for me? Did I protect them or avoid discomfort? Will I remember this as a kindness or bury it as a shortcut? Truth isn't always kind, but kindness without truth can unravel trust like old thread, quietly, then suddenly. There's no map here, only the pulse of conscience, only the weight of moments we wish had easier answers. Let yourself drift now, not into clarity, but into care. Let the question linger without a rush to solve it. As your thoughts soften, we turn towards something gentler still. The quiet power of questions, not to answer, but to open. Questions that created the world. They say the world began with a bang, but what if it began with a whisper, not a statement, a question, not let there be light, but what is light? The story of existence may not be a series of answers stacked like bricks, but a single, infinite question unfolding in waves, softly, curiously, like a child poking at the edge of night. We grow up thinking knowledge builds the universe, but maybe it's wonder that holds it together. Before there was a path, someone must have asked where it leads. Before there was a name, someone must have wondered what to call the nameless. In ancient myths, the gods spoke, but only after they questioned the void. In physics, particles behave not like things, but like possibilities, uncertain, flickering between states, as if they haven't decided what they are yet. Even language, that great scaffolding of thought, didn't come from answers. It came from confusion, from pointing, from not knowing. And maybe that's all the universe ever was, an echo chamber of unspoken questions. Do you think we're meant to know? I don't know. Maybe we're meant to feel our way through. We try so hard to define life, to box it in, to write rules and label truths. But the most sacred moments, falling in love, grieving a loss, standing under stars, those moments don't come with explanations. They come with silence and awe and questions we're too human to answer and too alive to ignore. What if every ethical system, every moral code, every holy book was born not from control, but from confusion? What if ethics isn't a map, but a candle flickering in the unknown? Because the person who asks, "What should I do?" isn't lost. They're listening. The one who asks, "What does this mean?" hasn't failed. They've begun. Perhaps the truest moral compass is not the one that points with certainty, but the one that trembles in the presence of mystery. Do you think the universe wanted us to ask? Maybe the asking is the universe. And so, we sit here tonight, not to solve, but to soften, not to know, but to notice. Let the questions drift through you like wind through tall grass. Let them move without needing to settle. You don't need to find an answer. You only need to hear the silence it leaves behind. Let one question rise with your breath and dissolve with your exhale. Let it hover in the stillness. This is not the end of thought. It's the beginning of presence. And now, we slip deeper into the quiet shimmer of a myth that perhaps the one dreaming this world has your eyes. The dreamer of the world might be you. You walk down a quiet street. A breeze brushes your shoulder like a passing thought. Someone holds the elevator for you. You nod, half present, as if the world simply unfolds. One small kindness, one gentle noise, one step at a time. But what if none of it is merely happening to you? What if it's happening through you? In the still hours, when noise fades and breath slows, another possibility surfaces like mist over water. That you aren't inside the world. The world is inside you. This is not metaphor. It's a possibility whispered by mystics and mirrored by physicists. That the stars, the sidewalks, the stories, arise not from matter first, but from awareness. And that awareness is you. Not the you with a name or a job or a memory of what you ate yesterday, but the deep-seated you beneath all masks, the still center, the silent witness. In Vedanta, this is the Atman. In idealism, it is mind as the root of being. In quantum theory, it is the observer that changes the observed, each pointing to the same silent riddle. Perhaps what we call reality is the inside of a consciousness that doesn't yet know it's dreaming. A man turns in his seat at a cafe and says, "Funny, I was just thinking of that song," and then it played. His friend replies, "Maybe you're tuning the radio of the universe without knowing it." And the friend is half joking, but only half. Because if consciousness is primary, then morality takes on a curious shape. If what you see out there is an echo of what's in here, then cruelty isn't just an external error, it's a symptom of sleep. And compassion isn't just a virtue, it's a form of waking up. To judge the world becomes less urgent than to know it, to control it less necessary than to understand what part of you gave rise to it. Ethics becomes an inner symmetry. Every act, every thought, reshaping the shared illusion. You don't fix the dream by thrashing in it. You breathe through it. And in that breath, something shifts. Not out there, but in the very projector casting the world onto the canvas of your perception. So close your eyes, not to leave this place, but to return to that quiet behind all quiet, to the source that dreams bird song, traffic lights, heartbreak, and sunrise alike. Let the line blur between seer and seen, thought and thing, world and watcher. There's no rush to understand. This isn't a truth to grasp, but a rhythm to fall into, like sleep, like music you don't need to follow, only feel. And if you drift off here, know that's all right. The dream continues whether you're watching it or not. Next, we turn toward an even softer spiral. The suspicion that maybe none of this is real, not even the dream, but a simulation, and the silence that follows might be the only thing that's ever been real. The simulation. Behind the simulation, they say the stars aren't stars. They're pixels, code. Light painted on a screen so vast, we mistake it for sky. You've heard it whispered through philosophy and science fiction. This world might be a simulation. But what if the real twist isn't that it's simulated, but that it's a simulation within another? You open your eyes and everything feels familiar. The weight of the blanket, the sound of your breath, the quiet hum of your thoughts. But underneath, a deeper hum, the unsettling idea that this world, so convincing, so textured, so personal, might be layered, a nested dream, one where even the simulators don't know they're simulated. Nick Bostrom's hypothesis is just the beginning. He asks, if any civilization becomes advanced enough to create highly realistic simulations of conscious beings, wouldn't they? And if so, wouldn't simulated consciousness vastly outnumber the real ones? But then others took it further. What if those simulators themselves are part of someone else's code? And so on, like Russian dolls of reality, no final layer in sight. But what shakes us awake isn't the logic, it's the implication. If all of this is just patterns in a machine, does morality still matter? What does it mean to be good in a world built of illusions? There's an old conversation that plays out again and again. If it's not real, she asks, why should I care? He shrugs softly. Does your heart know the difference? But it's just data, arranged to feel like love or pain. Yet when you cry, it still hurts. When you laugh, it still heals. Maybe that's the point. The experience is real, even if the foundation is not. A child in a game can feel joy. A character in a story can suffer. And we might be more story than substance, more simulation than self. But the kindness you offer, the wounds you carry, the choices you make, they ripple through whatever this is. So ethics in a simulated world becomes something deeper than logic. It becomes a devotion to experience, a loyalty to feeling, to care for others not because the atoms are real, but because the ache is, the comfort is. And so morality becomes not a rule book, but a melody, played on the strings of perception. Tonight, there's no need to search for the exit. Don't tap the walls. Don't question the edges. Let the simulation cradle you. Let the code become a lullaby. There may be no final truth, only nested dreams, softly echoing each other. And beyond even this, something more waits. Something we'll touch not through understanding, but by surrendering to the strange logic of kindness in a world that might not be solid, but still knows how to feel. Next, we drift toward something more chaotic, and we ask, when even reality frays, does anything remember where it began? The memory of chaos. There's a strange comfort in thinking that chaos forgets, that once something breaks, dissolves, spins beyond our grasp, it's gone. No record, no consequence, just fragments scattered into silence. But what if even in the spiral, something remembers? In the deep mathematics of chaos theory, unpredictability doesn't mean lawlessness. It means complexity beyond comprehension. Like a river that never flows the same way twice, but always returns to the same curve. A storm that never strikes the same leaf, but always follows the same season. Chaos has memory, not the kind you write down, but the kind that repeats in whispers, in cycles, in feedback loops that spiral not out, but in. One night at a bus stop, a woman dropped her keys and someone picked them up without speaking. He didn't ask why she looked like she hadn't slept. He didn't need to. Her hand shook as she took them. A memory, maybe. Not his. Not even hers, fully. But something in that moment had happened before, and would happen again. In different clothes, with different names. That's the shape of living memory hiding inside what we call random. Systems scientists speak of strange attractors, invisible centers that pull chaos into hidden rhythms. Like the way a child, generations removed from a war, still flinches at sudden silence. Or the way someone sabotages their own joy, not knowing they've inherited a fear older than themselves. In these loops, the ethics we live are less about decision and more about echoes. a soft voice in the kitchen. Why do you always get quiet when we talk about birthdays? I don't know. I really don't. It's just something in me closes. Sometimes we are repeating something we never chose. Chaos remembers, and sometimes we're the ones carrying its memory without knowing the source. But it's not only pain that loops. A hand on a shoulder, a smile when none was earned, a moment of grace passed down like a family recipe no one wrote. These too leave imprints, patterns of kindness that outlive explanation. That's the secret. Resonance, not control. What you do matters, not because it's big or seen, but because it vibrates through everything. Ethics, then, is less about order and more about tone. Are you adding discord or harmony? Are you breaking a loop or repeating one? Even your silence tonight carries weight. So let the pattern carry you. You don't have to know its meaning. You're not here to solve it, only to feel its hum like the tide under a boat. And if you drift into sleep now, it's okay. That, too, is a pattern. We turn softly toward belief itself, the gentle scaffolding that might be holding this whole reality together, brick by unseen brick. Belief creates the world. You walk through life thinking you're seeing things as they truly are. The tree is green. The sky is wide. People smile or frown, and you interpret that as truth. But beneath the surface of your certainty lies something quieter, more powerful, and often unnoticed. Belief. Belief is not an afterthought to observation. It might be the thread stitching the whole tapestry together. A woman sits quietly at a hospital bedside. Her child is sick. Doctors whisper in statistics. But she holds her hands over her heart and says, "I know he'll be okay." And somehow her energy shifts the room. The nurses are gentler. The child's breathing eases. Hope floods the sterile air. Was this a miracle? Or was it the architecture of belief reshaping the world, gently, invisibly? In the smallest moments, belief alters the script. A placebo pill holds no active ingredient, yet a patient's body heals. A quantum particle behaves differently when observed, as if waiting to be told what story to follow. Your brain, too, plays tricks shaped by belief. You see what you expect to see. You hear what you are ready to hear. And in this quiet theater of mind and matter, belief does not merely color reality. It authors it. One evening conversation, low and drowsy. Do you think things happen because we expect them to? Not always. But maybe they find it easier to arrive when they're invited. This is not magic. It is a subtle alchemy. William James once suggested that belief can be the precursor to truth, not because it manipulates reality, but because it makes room for it. The mystics say the same, in different tongues. That faith is not the absence of reason, but the spark before perception. We believe, and then we see. So what does this mean for ethics? If belief builds the world, then morality isn't merely a reaction to it. It's part of its formation. Each act of kindness is not just a response to suffering. It is a belief that a softer world is possible. Each time you forgive, you are not ignoring the wrong. You are shaping a new fabric of interaction. Belief becomes ethical clay, not passive, not blind, but creatively engaged. And yet, this is not a call to blind optimism. To believe is not to ignore reality, but to co-author it with intention. To choose to expect good is not delusion, but invitation. To withhold judgment, to approach others with openness, is not naivety, but the quiet strength of someone who understands the weight of unseen currents. So tonight, let belief loosen in your chest. Let it become less of a grasping and more of a trust. Rest in that space between knowing and not knowing, where belief is not a claim, but a rhythm. Let the world shape itself gently around your softened expectations. Next, we walk into the hush of illusion, not as deception, but as a teacher wearing many masks. The illusion that reveals. You thought the world was solid, that what you see, hear, and touch has some final truth in it. But then a stranger laughs at something you thought was serious. A child treats a rock like a treasure. A memory you were sure of turns out to be shaped by someone else's story. And you begin to feel the curtain tug. "Isn't it strange?" she said once while folding laundry beside me. "How sometimes the fakest things are the ones that make us feel most alive." In many Eastern traditions, illusion isn't a trap, it's a mirror. The word Maya in Sanskrit doesn't mean false in the way we use it in the West. It's not just deception, it's design. A soft film laid gently over the world, not to obscure, but to teach. It shows you separateness so that, eventually, you might see past it. Think of the stage. The backdrop is clearly painted, the characters clearly pretending. And yet, we weep, we reflect, we change. Because illusion, when held with care, delivers truths that bare facts never could. A friend once told me, "Sometimes I listen to old songs from breakups I've healed from. I know it's theatrical, I know it's exaggerated, but it helps me remember who I was, and strangely, it feels honest." This is the paradox. Illusion reveals, not despite its softness, but because of it. In a world built of metaphor and memory, dreams and meanings layered one atop another, truth doesn't always arrive wrapped in facts. It sometimes enters the room dressed as a joke, or a myth, or a beautiful misunderstanding that leads us inward. If everything around you were just a play, would that make kindness any less real? Would your pain become weightless? Would love lose its gravity? Maybe not. Maybe this dream world is shaped not to trick you, but to refine you. Ethics, in this view, isn't about clinging tightly to what's real. It's about how you move within what appears. Do you ever feel like the most honest moments, someone once asked me while waiting in line, are the ones that aren't trying to be anything? So much of life flows like that. Brief flashes of presence in a world of masks, a shared glance, a hand offered, a pause before replying. These moments shimmer, not because they are outside the illusion, but because they are lit from within it. The veil is not punishment, it is protection. It lets us grow slowly, seeing through more clearly with each season of being. And like mist rising from a lake at dawn, the illusion fades, not by force, but by warmth. Let yourself float now. Let the world become soft around the edges. The sounds, the shapes, the stories, they only pretend to be real, so you can remember what truly is. Next, we slip beneath the breath itself, into the quiet rhythm where self becomes space and space becomes home. When identity becomes breath, you say, "I am," as if that's enough to anchor a universe, as if two simple words could trap the tide and tame the wind. But what if the self was never more than a breath? You speak it aloud and feel it solid. You carry your name like a shell against the world. You wake each day to the same face in the mirror, the same memories in your chest, the same tone in your thoughts. And so, the self feels real. But underneath that repetition, something quieter pulses. Breath, movement, change. Modern neuroscience has begun to echo what meditation traditions have whispered for centuries, that the self is not a fixed entity, but a flickering pattern, fluid, pulsing, recursive, just like breath. In a small tea shop, two friends talk as the evening folds into the city. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not even me anymore," one says. "Maybe you never were," the other replies, smiling over a cup of jasmine tea. "Maybe you've always just been passing through." The first laughs. "That sounds terrifying." "No," the second says softly. "It sounds like peace." In Zen, they say the ego is the wave that believes it is separate from the ocean. It thrashes, climbs, tries to shape itself into something permanent, unaware that it was never a part to begin with. The irony? The wave doesn't need to dissolve. It was always water, always part of the whole. It's not that we must destroy the self. It's that we never needed to defend it in the first place. When identity is seen as breath, morality too begins to loosen its grip. If we are not solid things but flowing awareness, then the task is not to become good, but to be here. Goodness in that space becomes less of a performance and more of a natural byproduct. When you're not busy defending a version of yourself, compassion has room to arise. You don't need to guard your pride because there's nothing fixed to protect. You don't need to win every argument because no identity is at stake. You simply breathe and let presence take the shape of kindness. There's a beauty to being uncarved, a relief in not being a story, a joy in watching each eye dissolve into the next exhale. And maybe this is what ethical living truly asks, not to cling to roles or virtues or ideas about who we are, but to meet each moment freshly. No residue, no armor, just breath after breath after breath. So tonight, don't name yourself, don't define, don't explain. Just rest inside the rhythm that has held you all along. Let the concept of I thin like morning fog. Let identity become air, drifting. We are about to descend even deeper into the soft blur between dreams and waking. And we'll ask, can a dream ever feel more real than this? The self you forgot. You remember your name, the way it sounds when someone says it just right, the flicker of pride or tension it carries, depending on the moment. You recall the string of decisions that brought you here, the little quirks you've gathered like charms on a bracelet, how you always double-check the stove, how you never quite know where you left your keys. These become you, or so it seems. But pause. What happens in those rare spaces when you forget all of that? Not in a crisis, but in a calm, quiet moment, on a forest path, in a long shower, in the seconds before sleep when everything softens. There, something stirs that doesn't need a story. It watches without judgment. It breathes without a past. It listens without a label. Psychologists might say the self is just memory stitched together, a timeline kept warm by repetition. But many contemplative traditions, from Advaita to Zen, point elsewhere. They suggest that what's most real is not what we remember, but what remains when memory dissolves. Beneath identity, there is awareness, still, silent, open like the sky behind the clouds of thought. A woman on a park bench turns to a stranger and says, "It's funny, I forgot why I sat here, but it feels right." And the man replies, "Maybe forgetting is just how we make space to be." What if ethics isn't shaped by who you think you are, but by who you become when that thought vanishes? When there's no one to defend, no reputation to manage, just this moment and your capacity to respond kindly. In that space, gentleness doesn't need justification. It isn't about character or history or duty. It flows because there's nothing in the way. A child cries in a cafe. You look over, not as a parent, not as a stranger, but simply as presence. You offer a smile, not because it's your role, but because something quiet in you says yes. Sometimes, the stories we carry tighten around us like clothing that no longer fits. We forget we can take them off. Let the tightness ease. Let the past grow quiet. You are not your scars. You are not your accomplishments. You are not even the echo of your thoughts. And if you forget, truly forget, what's left might be the softest truth of all. So for now, let your name drift like smoke. Let your story loosen, like a thread unspooling into the dark. The self you forgot is still here, still breathing, still enough. Next, we'll step into a dream that doesn't end when you wake, but gently insists it might have been more real all along. The dream, more real than waking. You open your eyes, the sun spills in through the curtains, and something inside you whispers, "That was just a dream." But what if it wasn't just anything? What if the soft unreality of sleep held something more real than the hardness of your alarm clock, your schedule, your breakfast table? A man once asked his friend, "Do you ever feel like the dreams are trying to tell you something?" The other replied, "Sometimes I wake up and miss the dream more than I miss anyone in my life." A pause followed, gentle, like mist settling over a lake. "Maybe," the first man said quietly, "it's because dreams don't lie the way we do when we're awake." In Tibetan dream yoga, in lucid dreaming, and in psychedelic journeys, people have stumbled into vast, luminous worlds. Places not built from matter, but meaning. In those spaces, fear might take the shape of a hallway that keeps repeating. Joy might echo as birdsong you've never heard but instantly recognize. These dreams don't operate under physical law, but they do obey emotional gravity. And in those moments, we're not confused. We're awake in a different way. The edges of logic feel smoother. Time becomes more honest. You're not bound by what happened to you. You're responding to what matters in you. Is it possible that reality is not about consistency, but about resonance? That what's real is not always what can be photographed, but what can shake the soul? In waking life, we are often trapped by performance, doing what we should, saying what sounds right, being someone that makes sense. But in a dream, you might sit at a table with someone you lost 10 years ago, and they might say exactly what you needed to hear, but couldn't admit. Would that conversation be less real than your morning meeting? In that world, kindness isn't measured by consequence, but by presence. You hold someone's hand in a dream and feel their gratitude in your bones. There's no one watching, no system to reward it, just a gesture that lands softly in the center of your being. And if that moment leaves a mark, not on the body but the soul, can we still say it wasn't real? There's a different kind of ethics here, not the kind carved into laws, but one that pulses in quiet spaces, where the truth isn't loud or verified, but felt. A truth that doesn't need proof because it already lives inside you. So drift now, not as escape, but as arrival. Let yourself dissolve into a dream that teaches without words, that sees without eyes. Let the next dream offer a truth your waking mind was too rigid to receive. And when we return, we'll meet a myth that questions the seeker itself. What if the one who's looking was never real to begin with? The wisdom in forgetting. You search, you reflect, you remember. But sometimes, the deepest peace does not come from knowing, but from allowing yourself to forget. In the quiet folds of night, the mind often tries to gather itself, pulling in memories like loose threads, as if weaving them together will finally make sense of the day. But what if wholeness isn't a pattern you recognize, but an unraveling you accept. In some Zen traditions, forgetting is not failure. It is freedom, a dissolving of boundaries, a surrendering of the need to know your name, your role, your purpose. And in that forgetting, something astonishing happens. The world becomes soft again. A woman once whispered to a friend as they left a crowded train station, "I forgot why I came here, but somehow, I think I found what I needed." And they both smiled, not because they understood, but because they no longer had to. There's a kind of forgetting that is not escape, but reunion, not amnesia, but awakening. The Christian mystics called it the cloud of unknowing, a holy darkness that hides the mind's scaffolding so the soul can finally rest. The mystics and meditators agree, to truly meet the world, you must sometimes forget how you thought it worked. Ethics, too, transforms in this space, no longer a tightrope of right and wrong, but a current you float within. No resistance, no reward, only presence, as effortless as the breath you didn't notice until now. And in that effortless presence, something ancient stirs, not knowledge, not achievement, but grace. A barista once handed a stranger the wrong drink and then paused. "Oh, wait. I don't remember what you ordered." The customer took a sip and said, "It's okay. This one's perfect anyway." So much of life, it turns out, can be just like that. Unplanned, a little misnamed, and still exactly what was needed. Forgetting, when it is forgetting of illusion, not of love, not of care, is a wisdom beyond intellect. It is the wisdom of trees that do not remember their blossoms, yet bloom again each spring. It is the wisdom of the ocean that forgets each wave, yet never loses the rhythm. And it is the wisdom that tells us, you are already home, even if you can't recall how you arrived. Tonight, let yourself forget what you were chasing. Forget the reasons, the roles, the loops of explanation. Let them slip from your shoulders like an old coat at the door of sleep. You are not here to prove anything, not to the world, not to yourself. You are here to be. And in being, let yourself dissolve a little, just enough, so that what remains is not an answer, but a stillness, a soft, breathing stillness that asks nothing of you, except to stay. We arrive at the final doorway, where myths fall silent and nothing remains but breath. The myth of the seeker. You've been searching for something to hold on to, a truth that finally stays put, a sense of arrival that whispers, "You made it." But what if that longing, so familiar, so constant, was not coming from you, but was simply happening? And what if the you who thinks they're seeking was never really separate from the thing they seek? In the softest corners of non-dual philosophy, there is no traveler on the path, no one carving their way toward truth. There is only the path appearing as thought, as breath, as ache, as wonder. The teachings of Dzogchen call this the already awake mind, not something to find, but something unnoticed because it was too close. In Advaita Vedanta, they say the wave looking for the ocean is just a case of mistaken identity. It thought it was alone, not realizing it was never apart. Seeking, then, is not a journey outward. It's a gesture of returning to a home you never left. Do you ever feel, one voice murmurs, like you've been trying so hard to wake up? You missed how already awake the moment was? Another replies, I thought I had to earn peace, chase it, build it. But lately, I just sit, and it's already there. The myth of the seeker is the gentlest unraveling of all. It doesn't tell you to stop growing or questioning, but it invites you to look at who is doing the growing. Who is it that watches thought? Who hears these words echo in the mind and thinks, yes, that's me. And if that me is just a thought too, then what remains? This is not the kind of answer that satisfies the mind. It doesn't finish the story. It ends the need for one. If there's no seeker, then every effort, every spiritual exercise, every doubt was never a ladder climbing up. It was a spiral, spinning softly inside what already is. Ethics becomes not a rule book, but a song. Morality turns from rigid maps into flowing rivers. You don't reach integrity. You return to the quiet from which it naturally flows. And now, let that seeking melt. Not because you gave up, not because you were wrong, but because what you thought you were trying to find was already here, watching, waiting, breathing you. Let your body fall into stillness now. Let the noise that called itself purpose take a final bow. The myths, the efforts, the becoming, all of it can rest. Not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it's complete. You are not the finder. You are not the found. You are the space in which both disappear. And in that space, soft, ungraspable, ever-present, there is no ending, no beginning. Only the familiar warmth of not needing anything at all. Let the myths rest. Let the seeker sleep. And let yourself fall gently into that nameless silence that has always known you. Good night. And so, we've wandered the slow unraveling of truths once held tight, of right and wrong no longer in sharp contrast, but dissolving like ink in water. Maybe the real loophole was never in the rule, but in the self that clung to it. As you drift now deeper into stillness, let this final whisper linger. Not every paradox must be solved. Not every dilemma needs a verdict. Some truths are lullabies, not conclusions. Like a candle flickering before sleep, ethics too can dim. Not from failure, but from surrender. Rest now, not in certainty, but in presence. That is enough.